Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, I lifted the plant pot, searching for the keys. Oh, there they were. I retrieved them from their hiding place. They jingled in my hands. I could hear barking, yapping and scratching at the front door. I turned the lock. It clicked. The door creaked open. It most certainly needed oiling, I thought to myself. Two excited dogs burst through the door like rockets taking off, bounding towards me, their tails wagging vigorously while their bodies jiggled excitedly. They were always thrilled to see me, every single time. The energy in the house was permeated with an excited jubilance because these dogs knew exactly where I was taking them. They could already envisage smells on the glorious green turf that they would soon encounter, sprinkled with the exciting, strange essence of other dogs, leaving behind their scent markings on the hiking trail. An invisible telephone exchange between different dog breeds, announcing that they recently had been in the area. I got down on my knees, greeting the two excitable dogs, a bulldog called Zodiac and a Boston Terrier called Sweetie Pie. "Hello, boys! And how are you today? Fancy a walk?" "Of course you do." They knew exactly what I was talking about, as the word walk always seems to invite an enthusiastic response from all of our furry friends. I retrieved the leads from the hooks in the entrance hall. Maria Munro's impeccable, well-presented home smelt of furniture polish, along with a refreshing citrusy bouquet of lemons. It was meticulously clean, ordered and scrupulously organised, reflecting her methodical personality, as everything in her home had its perfect place. She was a librarian in Portland with a savvy efficiency. I glanced at the sparkling windows of her home. They gleamed brightly in the morning sun, without a smudge mark in sight, while the radiant light danced through the living area of her sitting room. I felt a measure of shame when I discerned how meticulously clean and shining everything was, without a dust particle in sight. While in contrast at my home there were shopping bags that hadn't been unpacked yet, and dishes from last night's dinner still soaking there in the sink. I had a sneaking suspicion that if you ran your hand down the tops of my doors, there would be dusts on your fingers, and a lot of it too. But I was certain the tops of Maria's doors would be spotless. On impulse, I decided to test this theory of mine out. I wanted to see how thorough Maria was as a cleaner, so I quickly rubbed my hands along one of her doors, longing to find an obscure piece of dust that she had neglected to attend to. But not a chance. As I had expected, there wasn't a drop of dust in sight. How was it possible to keep one's house so squeaky clean, especially when you had a full-time job, I wondered in awe. I felt somewhat ashamed of my great lack of cleaning prowess. It was most certainly a job I hated and despised like most people, always putting it off to the very last minute. Before long, I was walking with the two dogs down the long village green that fringed the boundary lines of all the properties in our neighbourhood. It was a rural area, not far from Portland. The dogs bounded happily beside me as we trailed past several houses until we finally reached the hiking trail, that started on the edge of the green, trailing upwards through a farmer's field that was usually full of grazing cows. We'd have to get through the hollow space in between the picket fencing on both sides of the meadow. Then we would reach a rugged clearing that was almost always muddy, and potholes were filled with water, but when the weather was dry, the ground would crack. On the edge of the clearing was a very, very pretty sylvan, full of the most exquisite towering Douglas firs that the intrepid explorer David Douglas once described as one of the most striking, truly graceful objects in nature. I happen to heartily agree. As you've probably guessed, I'm a dog walker. It wasn't a job I actively actually pursued. It somehow landed in my lap. I'd often volunteered to walk people's dogs just because I loved animals. Then I began to get paid for my services, so walking dogs became a way of life for me, an intrinsic part of life that I'd never ever considered before, but I didn't look back from it. Most people referred to me as the dog lady. I simply loved dogs. As we reached the clearing, Zodiac made a beeline for a pile of horse muck on the edge of the woods. He began to hoover it down gutsily. Try as I might to drag him away from the pile of crap, he was having nothing of it. He refused to budge, cramming the horse manure in his mouth in a frenzied enthusiasm, as if he was tucking into prize fillet of beef from the butcher's. I knew better than to wrestle with a bulldog's stubbornness. It's a losing situation, as any bulldog owner will tell you. I truly think their obstinate, headstrong, willful characters is possibly why many of us are drawn to them in the first place, as their pig-headed contrariness makes them natural comedians. Why some dogs enjoy eating horse manure is beyond me, but there you go. I was only glad that Maria was not an eyewitness to Zodiac's bizarre antics. With her super sense of cleanliness, if she knew her dog was dining on horse manure, she would be totally and utterly mortified. The dogs bounded happily through the wood green. This was where they could run off the lead, so I quickly unleashed them. They knew the path well. Fortunately, they were usually well behaved, only running a few feet ahead of me. It was a magnificently beautiful day. The sweet uplifting scent of pine filtered through the valley, while the pretty woodland flowers from bluebells to violets, wild geraniums and trout lilies were found growing in random clusters together throughout this idyllic woodland space. The forest was bespeckled with tiny reflectant beams of light that created the same mesmerizing effects as a mirror ball. This moving light danced on the ferns, mosses and flowers like clusters of tiny fairies. All of a sudden Zodiac began chasing after a little rabbit, but he knew he was no match for the little creature. He managed to make a hasty escape down a burrow. It wasn't long before Zodiac stumbled on the remains of a dead rabbit. He was absolutely thrilled. In a second it was dangling out of his mouth with a fearsome hold. I assure you, trying to retrieve a dead rabbit from the edge of a bulldog's mouth is no mean feat, and I was having no success whatsoever. "Zodiac," I said, racing towards the feisty bulldog, "drop that rabbit right now. Now, do you hear me? Now, let it go. Let it go." Zodiac was being bloody-minded. He refused to let go of the rabbit. He was belligerent and began to growl at me with a dog language that said, "It's mine." I immediately found a long stick and tried to prise it out of his mouth, poking away at it from the edges, but it was still a futile exercise. My heart sank in the depths of my chest like a weary sun at the end of a hard, grueling day. That was when I saw Mrs. Airedale. She was walking her 2 greyhound dogs through the woods. Did it have to be her of all people? The pretentious woman who thought she was a cut above everybody else in our neighbourhood. She was looking at me with eyes of a vulture, hungry to find some disagreeable things about me that she could report back to the people who hired my dog services. She loved nothing better than causing drama, chaos and discord wherever she went. She was the kind of person you would dread as a neighbour. "Hello there," she said as she approached me. "Is everything all right?" She was watching me beadily, on my knees attending to my nauseating, repugnant rabbit problem with Zodiac, while I was pretending to adjust his fancy Diamante collar. "Oh, absolutely," I lied. "Everything's fine." "Oh, there you are. That's better, Zodiac. Now your collar fits better, doesn't it?" I said, raising myself from the ground into a standing position, smiling warmly at Mrs. Airedale, a fake smile that did not reach my eyes. I suddenly felt very embarrassed, unduly self-conscious about Zodiac's mouthful of dead, decomposing hair, bones and sinew. The last thing I wanted was for Mrs. Airedale to see a dead rabbit hanging out of Zodiac's mouth. It reflected badly on me. What if she thought Zodiac had just killed it, that I had condoned him running around terrorising the rabbit population? I had to cover up for the bulldog's seemingly duplicitous crimes. But looking at Zodiac, he looked as happy as a pig in muck. His flat nose portrayed an innocence that masked his natural mischievous nature. It would seem that Mrs. Airedale was not buying any of it at all. "Oh, something smells quite repugnant," she said, looking directly at Zodiac, her beady, suspicious eyes staring at him like a detective inspector at a police station. "What's that he's got in his mouth? It's very whiffy." "Oh, it's a toy rabbit," I lied, trying my best to defend Zodiac's honour, or my own. I couldn't decide which. "Well, that rabbit needs a jolly good wash in the washing machine. Just soak it in a bucket, run it in warm water. It should do the trick for you. Why some owners allow their dogs to run amok with filthy toys, it makes the mind boggle. It's not very hygienic. I must say I'm surprised that Maria doesn't take better care of her dog's toys. My dogs have meticulous bedding," she boasted, "and spotless dog toys that smell of lavender. They're very particular, you know. Never liked rolling in the mud at all, not like that thing over there," she said, throwing Zodiac a disapproving glance. "I never did like bulldogs," she piped. "Slobbery dogs." I nodded in agreement, well, in pretend agreement, as I watched her walking away, but gave up in attempting to retrieve the rabbit from Zodiac's mouth, as frankly it was a fruitless expedience that would not reap any rewards for me. About what must have been 5 minutes later, running directly towards me in the woods were 2 young boys, easily between the ages of 13 or 14. I couldn't be sure. They were wearing balaclavas over their heads, so all I could discern were the eyes staring through the holes. To my horror, I realised they were running directly towards me. One of them stopped a yard away from me, and he began pulling out a revolver, pointing it directly at me. Was this some kind of a prank, I wondered, because if this was some kind of a juvenile joke, I wasn't finding it funny. Not at all. I was so shocked that fear eluded me, like a bird on a wing. But I knew better than to challenge these 2 young boys. Their eyes looked intensely determined. I sensed they clearly meant business. The next thing I knew was one of the boys grabbed Sweetie Pie, the little Boston Terrier, in his arms, running off with her, while the other boy handed me a brown envelope. "Don't worry," said the boy. "You'll get him back if you do as we say. Read the letter." I watched them dart away with Sweetie Pie, who was now yelping. "Stop! Please stop!" But the boys did not listen. They darted away. I could hardly believe what had just transpired, but something in my gut just knew that this was not a practical joke of any kind. I fumbled in my envelope to read the note. It read the following: "We mean you and your dog no harm, but we're desperate for money. In short, your dog has been kidnapped, but he is in good hands. We would like $1,000 for his or her safe return. If you involve the police, you will not get your dog back. Never. If you value your dog's safe return, you will do exactly as we say. We will return your dog to you once you have dropped the envelope on the ground at the tree in the woods that has a yellow balloon attached to it. The drop-off will be at 2:30 a.m. in the morning. One of us will come to collect the envelope, to check the money. Once I give the all clear to my partner, with a secret word that only we know, he will release your dog to you. We do apologise for the emotional upheaval and inconvenience we have caused you. Yours sincerely, 2 well-meaning kidnappers. P.S. Do not try any stupid stunts. We will know if you have called the police." I could hardly believe what I was reading. 2 young boys were so desperate for money they had resorted to kidnapping Maria's dog while demanding a ransom, and not a hefty one at that. I knew instinctively involving the police would be futile, especially for only $1,000, but then again allowing children to get away with such deplorable behaviour was not really acceptable. I mean, they had approached me with a revolver, for goodness sake, which I sneakily suspected probably belonged to their father. I doubted they would have used it on me, but even so it was never worth taking the risk when someone approached you with a revolver, regardless of their age. My father had always taught me that. I glanced down at poor Zodiac, who was wincing. His short tail was tucked under his legs. I glimpsed a sorrowful expression in his dark eyes. Even the limp dead rabbit had lost its appeal. Its flaccid pendulous body was lying by his feet. He made a squeaking sound as we walked away back to Maria's house. He seemed so sad. The walk was lonely, like we were missing a very special part of it, sweetie pie. Later that evening I visited Maria. My heart fluttered in my chest with hundreds upon hundreds of butterflies, as I knew that Maria would not be happy about Sweetie Pie's disappearance. It seemed I wasn't wrong. The moment she heard me sauntering up her stone steps that led to the front door, she hurriedly opened the door, her face a picture of dread. "What's happened to Sweetie Pie? I got your note saying we need to talk. It scared the hell out of me. Please tell me she's all right. She's not dead, is she? Please, don't say she's dead. She's my baby." "No, Sweetie Pie is not dead. Calm down, Maria. There's nothing to worry about with her, but we do have a problem. It's rather a big problem, I'm afraid." Maria looked at me with eyes growing wide with terror. "Problem? What kind of problem?" "Out with it, Bernice. You're scaring the hell out of me. What kind of a problem?" "Sweetie Pie's been kidnapped." "Kidnapped? Sweetie Pie's been kidnapped?" she said, looking appalled. "But who would kidnap a Boston Terrier? Are you being serious? This is completely insane." "There's a ransom request. The money needs to be dropped off in the early hours of the morning, at about 2:30. Maria gasped, her hands clutching her mouth, as if trying to assimilate the enormity of what I'd told her. "Bernice, I'm not a millionaire, for goodness sake. How much are these people asking for?" $1,000, I said, passing Bernice the letter. She looked heartily relieved. "Only $1,000? I thought it was going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars, the way you were talking. Well, we're not going to involve the police, that's for sure. I can't risk losing my precious little Sweetie Pie. Poor thing, she must be terrified out of her skin. Thankfully, $1,000 I can well afford. But kids kidnapping a dog? What on earth has the world come to? I think I've seen everything now." For a moment she looked awkward, and then she finally piped, "I do have one problem, Bernice, which is where I need your help." "Of course. Anything. Name it." "Could you please be the one to go to the woods for me to deliver the ransom? All on your own. I'm so scared of the dark. I couldn't possibly go there in the middle of the night. Oh, it would frighten me so much." My heart sank. In truth, it was intimidating and unnerving venturing into the woods at the dead of night, and I wasn't the bravest person in the world, but I reluctantly agreed. I did hold myself responsible for the outlandish kidnapping in some way. I was awoken to my alarm clock at 2 a.m, but I was already awake. I'd spent the entire last few hours tossing and turning in my sleep. I was in such a dreadful state. I could see the body of my fiancé lying in the bed like a dead log, barely moving at all, except for the rising and falling of his chest. Luckily he didn't respond to the alarm going off. He never ever did. I was thankful he was a deep sleeper, as I didn't want to involve him in my strange escapade. I knew he'd never have allowed me to go into the woods in the dead of night, but this was not a question of choice. It was a prerequisite. It was essential to return Sweetie Pie safely back home. I crept down the staircase stealthily of our double-storey home, terrified that the creaks of the rickety floorboards would give me away, and that my fiancé would catch me sneaking out of the house at this godless hour of the morning. I had been very clever, progressive and forward-thinking enough to retire to my bed in a tracksuit that night. So all I needed to do now was to put on my sneakers, headlamp, and then I'd be good to go. I tiptoed towards the front door, quietly turning the key in the lock, silently as I could. The door was open. I pushed it quietly, closing it behind me, until I heard the familiar click. I then hid the key in the hanging basket outside the front door, cautiously tiptoeing down the drive towards the outside village green that bordered all the properties on our street that were lined with pretty medium-sized oak trees. It was here where I suddenly drew in a deep, calming breath. I had broken out of the house easily. Now I needed to make my way through a whole meadow full of cows, over the clearing, until I finally reached the forest. It seemed rather overwhelming. It was a calm, bright night, which brought me a small measure of solace, as the light of the stunning luminescent moon, along with the clusters of silvery stars, made the world far less daunting. Still, it felt really weird to be up at this outrageous time of the early morning. I hurriedly ran across the green, up the hilly hiking trail, towards the farmer's field. Luckily the cows were on the furthest side of the field grazing. They were oblivious to my presence. It was only when I reached the woods that my heart began to pound violently in my ears, while my breathing quickened. A brisk breeze blew against the jiggling trees. They shuddered, shook, and quaked like belly dancers, moving gracefully to the sounds of the crickets and frogs. There was nothing remotely pretty about the trees tonight, for they reminded me of gargantuan giant shadow people, menacing and evil, covered with ill-omened, baleful eyes, everywhere like the baubles on a Christmas tree. It felt like I was being watched by someone or something hostile and malevolent, while an unwelcome, pervasive energy seemed to envelop me in an ambience that had become almost predatory, unwelcoming, and exceedingly dangerous. I could not afford to think like this. I had an important job to do. I had to find that tree with the yellow balloon attached to its branches, the drop-off point to deliver the ransom. Please God, I thought, let me get this over as fast as I can. I moved forwards cautiously down the hiking trail, soon spotting the tree with the yellow balloon. Relief washed over me like a warm shower over a shivering body. I could do this, I thought. I fumbled around in my pockets, drawing out the brown paper envelope containing the $1,000, placing it on the ground whilst retracting a few steps. I heard a snapping sound, along with a fast-moving tread, as someone was running towards me, a revolver still pointed directly at me, as a young lad wearing a balaclava lunged towards the brown envelope, fumbling through the cash awkwardly, counting it. Finally he said, "It's all here." All of a sudden we heard what I can only describe as the most terrifying, discomposing growl that I have ever heard. It quite literally caused me to jump out of my skin. There are no words to describe that sound to you. The dog kidnapper was equally as unhinged, for he dropped the cash out of his hands, his eyes wide with terror. A heavy pounding sound, like something very hefty, was running towards us. Something big, powerful, like a rhino or elephant. But what was it? I couldn't imagine. Why did we not run for our lives? Why did we wait to see what was coming our way? I cannot answer that question, but all I know is that we both became as solid and still as a wax statue, unable to move a single muscle. It was a taste of fear that I am not acquainted with, a taste so venomous, so lethal, it actually paralyzes its prey, so that the predator can have easy pickings without much physical exertion. We were those easy pickings, the quarry, if you like, or the deliciously succulent steak for whatever was hurtling towards us. I felt as if every ounce of energy had been suctioned out of me, so that I was like a car without petrol, a rusted, inoperative engine, a handbrake pulled up to park. I was immobilized by the disabling effects of fear, a poison so toxic that it rendered me as active and as useless as a dead fish. How I wanted to run, with all my heart and with all my soul, but my legs refused to work, like obstinate children, unwilling to eat their greens. Then we saw him. He thundered through the undergrowth towards us like a bull in a china shop, breaking, fracturing, snapping, smashing and fragmenting branches on his approach, hitting the forest floor with feet so powerful they sounded like ponderous drums. They made the ground beneath us feel hollow. The earth vibrated and shook like an earthquake, almost as if it was cracking open to release a gateway or portal to the insidious, guileful, crooked road that leads to hell. For this creature was like a giant demon that had emerged from the abyss itself, or the fiery depths, a dominion of which there is no light or hope, for all contained within its fiery, hot perimeters are lost forever. He was monstrous, a hideously ugly creature, the most grotesque thing that I've ever seen in my life, with glaring eyes impregnated by a deep, dark evil. Red, treacherous eyes. He was half man and half beast, with long black shoulder-length hair and a full black beard, a leathery dry skin, wrinkled like a wizened tortoise. He towered at 10 foot tall, 1,000 pounds, 4 foot wide. He was thick-set and burly, built like an army tank. His body was shredded with dense muscle. Every pore, every orifice of his body sweated an abhorrent hatred. His smell was odorous, repugnant, decaying and putrefying like dead flesh. He was swathed with long, flowing hair, blacker than the blackest night, so dark it was almost blue, while his human-like teeth almost seemed to be sharpened into daggers. He stood there for a second, yards away from us. In a trice, electric spasms of terror went buzzing and whizzing through my body like a taser. Suddenly, I was coming out of a catonic state. My legs began to revive. They began to awaken, as if emerging from a deep slumber. I realized that the young lad had also found his feet, but the monster grabbed him, then released his hold, retracting for a moment, slamming his fists against his powerful chest again and again, displaying his dominance. Then he delivered another brutal, savage roar. The boy began to scream. He tried desperately to run. It was too late. The creature grabbed him by the collar of his shirt, tugging the boy towards him. He looked fragile, weak, and tiny in the creature's large hands. "Act submissive," I cried. "Kneel down on the ground. Curl up into a ball. Do it now. Do it. He'll kill you otherwise." The boy listened to my words. He collapsed on the ground, kneeling in a submissive position. The roaring stopped. The creature calmed down. But he roared again when he saw me. For some reason I'd stopped running. I was standing there like a lemon, watching everything unfold before my eyes, certain I was taking part in a movie. This could not be real, could it? I immediately fell to my knees, curled up in a tight ball. The creature calmed down. He walked around and round us for a long while, breathing heavily like a horse. Once again he pounded his chest and released a roar. Then he turned around in a half-rounded swivel, vanishing into the woods, and was gone from our sight. "Are you all right?" I said to the boy, cradling his face in my knees. He was sobbing like a baby. That thing, it nearly killed me. You saved my life. I feel so ashamed, because you wouldn't be here if it wasn't for us." He promptly handed me the cash in the envelope. "Take it back," he insisted. "Not so fast," I said. "Why do you need this money so badly? No one would go as far as you did to kidnap a dog without good reason. You tell me, why do you need this money so much?" The boy's words wobbled. I could hear the hopeless despair and the grievous hopelessness in it. He said, My mother's dying of cancer. She doesn't have long to live. We don't have much money. We so wanted her to have a good send-off, before she meets her maker. I thought if we could raise the cash, we could take her on one last holiday before she gets seriously ill." "That's very nice of you," I said. "But you should have raised money for your mother at the local church or something. You'd be surprised how many people would have been willing to help your cause. It's a very good cause. You should have more faith in the goodness of people." I handed him the cash. "Keep it," I said. "That's your spending money, to buy candy floss and stuff like that on your holiday. My fiancé happens to work for a travel agent's, a very good travel agent's. He has a holiday to the Bahamas going spare for a family, with all expenses paid. That includes the flight to a luxurious, prestigious hotel, all the accommodation, food and drink. I'll leave the ticket under this tree for you tomorrow. But next time, think twice before you kidnap somebody else's dog, as losing an animal can be very soul-destroying." "Oh, that reminds me," said the boy, calling out, "Brown Owl," which was his secret code to release the dog after the money had been received. Then running towards me was a very excitable Sweetie Pie, very happy to be reunited with familiarity. He knew he was going home to Maria. He was covering me with sloppy kisses. The boy hugged me. Thank you. Thank you so much. I don't know what to say after everything we've done to you. I don't know how to thank you for this. It means the world to me. I know exactly what it means, I said. I do understand, you know. I never did find out who the mysterious boy was, whose mother had cancer, but I sincerely hope she enjoyed her holiday to the Bahamas. It was a lovely holiday too. I did find a yellow ribbon with a note on the tree thanking me, saying, "To the lovely lady who gave us the holiday free, you'll never know what you've done for us. May God bless you." All these years later, I now know the creature I encountered was a Bigfoot, and that woman dying of cancer got to create some forever memories on a holiday to the Bahamas. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. What would you have done in the same circumstances? Do you think you would have handed over the money to the kid and said, "You know what, go and enjoy yourself on a lovely holiday"? Or would you have felt that that was rewarding bad behaviour? Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, I watched my grandfather as his clumsy arthritic fingers unrolled the cellophane packaging of the thick, chunky cigar, tossing it carelessly to one side, where it landed precariously in the large ashtray. He popped the cigar into the edge of his slender mouth, lighting up the end of the stump with his gold lighter that had been given to him by my late grandmother when she was only 18 years old. Theirs had been a serendipitous love story, the likes of which they write movies about, as without her, my grandfather always divulged that the best part of him was now missing, like an amputated arm or leg. The cigar began to smoulder, and he puckered his lips inwards to inhale and suck some of the aromatic flavours out, and finally he exhaled, and wafts of cloudy smoke permeated the room in a warm, spicy, aromatic smell that I found swaddled me in a cosy warmth. "Ah, now that is so good," said my grandfather. "So very good." I could see his crinkled face, wrought with wrinkles that announced every year of his life that he had lived rather like the rings of a tree, suddenly begin to relax and straighten, almost as if the act of inhaling the spicy smoke had ironed out all his corrugated ridges, straightening them out like a clean white starched linen tablecloth. In my opinion, my grandfather was old, very old indeed, and as old as some of the trees that graced the woodgrove that fringed every corner of his miner's rustic cabin that had been built in 1885. He adamantly assured me that some of those trees had been there since he was a boy, which would almost certainly make them considerably ancient. I could only marvel at this astonishing, mind-blowing revelation. Could anything be older than my grandfather, I wondered? The entrenched, wizened furrows on his face cruelly betrayed his advancing age, and his handsome cornflower blue eyes were framed by a pair of opaque glasses, as over the years his dwindling eyesight had withered like the pretty wild flowers in the meadow at the end of the day. He looked good for his age. Well, so I'd been told by my mother. He was very willowy, but still athletic and lean, and his leathery sun-baked skin very weathered and rugged, a telltale reminder from his outdoorsy life, where he'd spent tireless hours in the great outdoors, enjoying the fruits of his labours from his hunting, shooting and fishing expeditions. What my grandfather did not know about the natural world was not worth knowing at all. It really was as simple as that. I looked on him in awe and wonder, like you might admire a Picasso painting at an illustrious art gallery. For in my eyes and opinion, my grandfather was infinitely more superior than some of the greatest masters that graced the covers of our history books, for he was my quintessential hero, and that is what really counted. I had begged my mother to let me stay with my Gramps, and persuasion had been as arduous as a tempestuous sea, but my nagging had finally worn my mother down like a waterfall eroding the rock face, and she had relented and given in like a helium balloon devoid of gas, withering away and finally deflating. She had wanted me to accompany her to my Aunt Hilda's home in Nantucket for the summer holidays, which is an elbow-shaped island 30 miles from Cape Cod by ferry, blessed with stunning lighthouses, exquisite beaches, foggy weather, and flat open countryside. I didn't want to be there, as Aunt Hilda, who had never had any children of her own, treated me with the disdain and disapproval of a strict authoritarian headmistress. If I had done anything to annoy her, She would beat the edge of my fist with the end of her wooden spoon, and glare at me defiantly with her hostile brown eyes that were cold and dispassionate. She would say, "Off with you now, Nathan. The dreadful sight of you makes my hair curl. There'll only be bread and milk for dinner tonight because you've misbehaved atrociously. I'm very disappointed with you, young man." True to her word, she would bring me a tray of bread and milk and lock me away in the confines of my own bedroom until the following morning, giving me all but a bedpan for my ablutions. In the morning, when she finally picked up my bedpan, she would deliberately wrinkle up her nose in disgust, as if she suspected the contents of my pan to be quite repulsive. I could always detect a gratified glimmer of pleasure in her eyes, as if in some way reprimanding me brought her a great deal of personal satisfaction. She made no secret of the fact that she simply despised children, and yet like a clockwork clown my mother brought me here religiously for every single summer holiday. Why? I couldn't even imagine. The worst part of it all is that my mother turned a blind eye to Aunt Hilda's regimental regimes of control and discipline, without raising any objections. Perhaps she was secretly intimidated by her somewhat ferocious older sister. I had a sneaking suspicion that this indeed was the case. While Aunt Hilda just loved to exercise her authority, rather like a flagging, degenerating muscle in need of serious toning. My mother, who was a schoolteacher by profession at the time, working at a local school in Chatham, would regularly take the ferry with me from the mainland in Cape Cod, where we lived all year round, to Nantucket, where we spent our summer holidays with Aunt Hilda. My father would remain at home, tethered to his scientific laboratory in the back of the yard or at the university. He was often labelled by many as the mad scientist, who looked as if one of his scientific experiments had gone awry, for his white hair stood up on edge like a spiky hedgehog, almost as if he'd experienced some kind of an electric shock during an explosive experiment, upon which his hair had fully paid the consequences, for even hot irons could not straighten those punky spikes out. I suppose it gave him a trendy look that was approved of by many of his science students at the university. Growing up, he was never around for us, as being a staunch workaholic, he perceived that spending time relaxing on a sandy beach was a catastrophic waste of time, invaluable lost expended energy that could have been so much better served learning, studying or experimenting. My father did not understand the modern concept of family holidays, nor did he identify with any form of relaxation whatsoever. He quite literally lived to work, and for him the world of scientific experiments outweighed the mundane drudgery of everyday life, and he would while away the long hours in the laboratory, sometimes for days at a time, with test tubes and beakers. So here I was in West Virginia with my Gramps, a solid 12 hours driving distance from Cape Cod, and the wider the distance from that venomous aunt of mine, the better, I thought happily, with a smug sense of satisfaction on my face. I was thinking about how disappointed Aunt Hilda would be not to have me around to bully any more. She would really miss that a lot. I could see that my grandfather was dozing off on the settee, rather reminding me of a sizable walrus basking on the sandy beach, making those grunts, as his snores weren't altogether dissimilar. The sound was so amusing, it was hard to suppress my giggles. I tiptoed cautiously towards the large box of cigars, so superbly presented in a lavish-looking ornate tin box covered in twee pitchers. Each expensive Cuban cigar looked so impressively beguiling and temptingly irresistible. I glanced quickly at my grandfather and could see that he was definitely asleep. Would he notice if I pinched one of his cigars, I wondered. It was doubtful, and it was worth the risk. I quickly pulled out a cigar from the box and grabbed the golden lighter, darting out of the small wooden cabin as quickly as I could. How I loved and adored this cosy gem of a bucolic primitive cabin, constructed from dogwood board and wooden siding, with a double-pitch shed roof. It was one excessively large, oversized room, with an outside outhouse as tradition dictates. It possessed a profane heater, an old-fashioned stove for cooking, a couple of cosy single beds, a large settee, bookcase, bureau, coffee table, cupboard, along with a large wooden table and chairs. For me it was an indelible mark on the landscape, a provocative reminder of marvellous summers spent fishing, hunting, hiking and tracking with my grandfather on this extraordinary, rustic, unpolished piece of land that had been in our family line for so many generations. Formerly a weekend hunting and fishing retreat, my grandfather had now transformed it into his forever home, and rightly so. I couldn't imagine a more spectacular place to live in the entire world, where blending into the rugged landscape was seamless. I quickly ambled towards the lake, which was to the front of my grandfather's property, several 100 feet away from the cabin, and I sat under a very large walnut tree there, on slightly moist ground that felt pleasantly warm to the touch, almost as if someone had warmed it for me. It was a magnificently beautiful day, with the sunlight dancing across the valley in a bright golden haze, whilst the shimmering silvery lake reflected the maple trees that flanked its far side like a large mirror, that I noticed had masterfully also picked up the fluffy clouds and the azure blueness of the sky to perfection. It was so peacefully tranquil by the lake, and I could hear the chirruping birds imbue the atmosphere with their pretty beguiling birdsong. My heart fluttered with excitement. This was my moment, the perfect moment I'd always longed for, a moment when I could taste the rich aroma of my grandfather's cigar and fill his shoes for a moment. Dare I try? I carefully slid the long, thick brown stub out of its packaging and trembled eagerly as my finger gently caressed it while I slipped it into the corner of my mouth. I suddenly felt so terribly grown up and incredibly important as I lit the cigar pensively with my grandmother's ornate golden lighter. It felt good, very, very good, as I began to smoke, inhaling in clouds of the aromatic vapour, and then reacting adversely to it by bursting sometimes into fits of coughing and spluttering as a result, for the fine wispy smoke had aggravated the soft lining at the back of my throat. I looked up quickly, swivelling my head to the right like a discerning owl. I had heard something, but what was it? Something was coughing and spluttering like me. Whoever they were imitating me. In a 3 o'clock position, I discerned a shadowy movement in the corner of my eyes that hijacked and stole my attention. To my amazement, standing only yards away from me, on a pair of powerful, muscular, human-like legs, was a Herculean-sized creature with an amused look in his deep-set dark eyes. I'd never seen anything like him before. The strange creature was copying my dexterous movements with his hands as he pretended to smoke with a make-believe cigar. His impressions were startlingly realistic and precise, including an exaggerated sequence of coughs and splutters, much like I'd done. This thing, whatever it was imitating me masterfully, like a phenomenal mime artist of note that would easily bedazzle Hollywood. But what was this strange, hairy, ape-like humanoid, I wondered? What was it? I don't even know how to describe my feelings at this point in time, as they were certainly twisted and knotted up, like a sailor's tangled rope. I don't know what I actually thought. I think I was too stunned to react, too amazed, really. I did try to comprehend the gravity of what I was perceiving, for this thing, this anomalous creature, certainly didn't fit into our stereotype of reality whatsoever. What was it, then? I couldn't be certain, for it resembled a tall man, covered in long, very sleek, coal-coloured hair. But then again, he wasn't entirely human either. He was certainly far too tall in stature and girth to be a man, for he was powerfully and very stockily built, with dense muscle tone. He towered at about 8 foot tall and 3 feet wide across the shoulder area. There were aspects to his anatomy that bore a rather striking, remarkable resemblance to a mountain ape, most notably seen in its dorsally domed head, hairless dark leathery face, defined prominent brow ridge, and deep-set treacle-coloured eyes. After a second of being imitated by this gargantuan-sized creature, my fear subsided and was expunged from me, like the squeezed water from a bath sponge. I sensed this warm-hearted creature meant me no harm at all, for he exuded a lively, congenial energy that was steeped in humour and fun. I threw the cigar at him playfully. He picked it up with his large human-like hands and began to try and smoke it, as I had done. And after his first disastrous inhalation attempts, he was coughing and spluttering as much as I had been, and this time he wasn't acting at all, as the smoke he inhaled had certainly irritated his throat, more so than it had mine. He wrinkled up his flat nose in disgust, as if to say, "Boy, that was nasty!" But that had not put him off at all. On the contrary, he was enjoying himself as much as I was, and the experience was mutually quite bonding. The creature's expressions were so hilariously funny that I couldn't help myself but laugh and laugh, so much so that my stomach began to ache, as the pain of the muscles twisted and turned around my abdomen, as if I'd done thousands and thousands of crunches. The trouble is, when I rolled over with laughter, so did the creature, as it was imitating me precisely and so brilliantly, which invariably meant I laughed all the more. So you cannot imagine the pain my stomach was in. This delightful creature was a natural comedian, and as he held my gaze with his twinkling eyes, he threw the cigar back to me, and so began our game of tossing the cigar to each other, backwards and forwards again and again, each taking a turn to take a puff, and we were both becoming happily embroiled in our fun-filled experience together. All of a sudden I heard my grandfather calling me, "Nathan, Nathan!" My heart sank at the sound of his voice, which brought the game to a swift, unfortunate halt. I glanced briefly at the creature, whose expression visibly dropped, as though he was rather disappointed, but he seemed to understand my need to have to leave. I pointed towards my grandfather's cabin, and then sprinted back home, hoping that I would see the strange creature again, but not altogether sure that I would. But the hope hung in my heart like a child's Christmas stocking on the hearth, in eager anticipation to be filled. "Have you seen my gold lighter?" asked my Gramp. "I could swear I put it down here after I had my last cigar." "No," I lied. "I haven't seen it, Gramps, but I'll help you look for it. It must have fallen off under the table. Maybe you dropped it." "You're a good boy, Nathan. Alas, my eroding eyesight is not what it used to be," he said, unleashing a heavy sigh. I wiggled out the golden lighter from my pocket and surreptitiously dropped it on the floor, pretending to find it. "Oh, here it is, Gramps," I said. "It was under the coffee table." My grandfather chuckled. "How the heck did it get there?" he joked. "This aging lark. It's not for the faint-hearted, let me tell you. Your grandmother would kill me from beyond the grave if I lost this precious lighter. It's even got my name engraved on it. Look," he said, showing it to me proudly. It read, "To my beloved Marcus, from your forever love, Christine." And so it was Gramps and I spent the rest of that blissful afternoon fishing at the lake, which was an angler's paradise, as it was bursting with a healthy supply of fish. We managed to catch 2 large bass of equal size and a catfish. It was over the fire pit here where my Gramp and I sat on 2 Adirondack chairs outside the cabin, where we baked our fish over the open flames, and it melted into the mouth as we ate it. It was certainly delicious. Why did the fish at home not taste this good, I wondered? And we lived in Cape Cod, for heaven's sake. It must be al fresco eating. That was where the heart of the secret lay. "Gramps," I asked suddenly, inspired by a secret longing to find out more about the strange creature I'd seen earlier on in the day, "do you get large people covered in hair living here in Virginia?" My grandfather's jaws opened in surprise, as if he couldn't quite believe what I was actually asking him. "How do you know about the wild man?" he asked me. "Who told you about them? I assume that is what you're talking about." I didn't want to tell my grandfather about the strange creature, obviously, because that would invariably mean confessing to my duplicity. Well, I did hear about it from somewhere, I think," I lied. "Really?" said my grandfather, looking rather bewildered. "I'm not sure I would be forthcoming about an encounter with a wild man if I'd had one and it were me," he said. "Most people think you've been drinking too much moonshine if you lay claims to such a sighting. For many believe that the legend of the wild man is just that, pure legend. But poor old Jason Dover, he learnt the hard way, as the folk in town teased him relentlessly about his startling claims of having seen a wild man that looked to possess remarkable ape-like features. No one believed him, of course, not a word of it. The man was not from honest stock, So his outlandish story backfired on him. Even in fact, if it were true. "Who is Jason Dover?" Gramps, I asked. "Jason Dover," said my grandfather, rolling the name around on the back of his tongue. "I haven't thought about Jason for a very long time. May God rest his soul." "So he's dead?" I asked. "He's dead all right," said my grandfather, lighting up a cigar and puffing the smoke in the air reflectively. "Tell me, Gramps," I urged. "Please tell me the story." "I assume there is one to tell," I asked hopefully. "You're right about that. One night when Jason had slipped into Mr. Dyer's vegetable yard and began helping himself to beets, beans, squash and turnips, you know, that sort of thing. Well, he was pilfering for his mother, plonking everything into a very large wicker basket that he'd brought along for the ride, so to speak. He then heard a crunching sound, a sound of chewing and snapping, and that was when he saw something very large sitting around the edge of the bed of carrots and chomping them. On first impressions, it looked exactly like a bear. But given it was a very bright, pleasant night, and the prisms of moonlight bounced on the creature's hands, illuminating them incredibly well, he perceived that this animal did not have paws. It had hands, so he knew with a profound certainty that this creature was most certainly not a bear. By this time, he was fascinated and very, very intrigued. What was the strange creature, he wondered. In his haste to find answers, he abandoned his baskets of goodies and surreptitiously crept from one beech tree to another, as these trees fringed the edge of a woodgrove that spanned the borders of Mr. Dyer's extensive, very well-fertilized vegetable yard. Jason silently moved ever closer towards the creature and had a great view of him in the light of the full moon. He described a tall, lanky creature with the face of a human and a dome-shaped head covered in very dark hair, sitting in the middle of the vegetable patch, scoffing carrots, along with the green foliage at its ends. The next thing he knew is that a large pair of hands had grabbed him around the waist, throwing him over a pair of powerful shoulders. He described being too shocked to even react or scream, as the shadowy form that had slipped out of the darkness had grabbed him so swiftly and so inconspicuously that it was almost too surreal and too dreamlike to comprehend that this was actually happening to him. The creature glided with him, straddled over his shoulders like a large sack of potatoes, and her running was like gliding because it was seamlessly smooth, almost as if she was skating on ice. In a trice he was jolted violently to his senses, in the horrified realization of what was actually transpiring. He was overwhelmed with a vast measure of angst, terrified that this creature might harm him. But common sense ultimately prevailed when he realized that if the creature wanted him dead, he would have been a goner already, for this thing could have swiped him across the head with one fatal blow, and it would be over Godovers for him. He ascertained the creature was female, possibly the mother of the tall, lanky youngling in the vegetable patch that was eating the carrots. She must have spotted him spying on her little one, and was naturally protective, possibly concerned that he might pose a threat. He described his abductor as smelling like hay or freshly mown grass, a very, very pleasing smell indeed. Imagine his amazement when the creature dropped him outside his very own car. She waited for him to open the door and to drive away. He said he felt as if she had literally escorted him off the property. Imagine his surprise to discover that the basket of vegetables he had left in Mr. Dyer's vegetable patch had been returned to him forthwith, dropped on his front doorstep the following morning, which meant that the creature even knew where he lived, knew the car he drove, and knew that the basket of vegetables was indeed his. It made him determine that these strange creatures may know us, even when we don't know them at all. So they're like the invisible eyes of the forest that watch and observe our every move, while we remain blindly oblivious that they're even there." "Wow, that is an incredible story," I said. "Do you believe it's true?" "Oh, I do," said my grandfather. "I rarely do. You see, Jason Dover, oh, well, he was a man of few words. Left school at 12 years old. Not very educated or articulate, with a pretty abysmal imagination. This is a story he wanted to share, because it was possibly the most exciting thing that had ever happened to him in his entire life. But regretfully for him, no one believed a word of it, but you did. Of course, Jason would never have made it up. He just couldn't. He wasn't clever enough to make a story up. I'm in no doubt that it was true." "Why did he die?" I asked. "What happened to him?" "Oh, it was a dirt bike accident. Got flung over the handlebars, I think. It happens." "And you, Gramps? Did you ever see the wild man?" I asked. "Not on your Nelly. Oh, I've seen signs that indicate that he's out there somewhere. I'm a tracker, you know, so I see things like that. I've noticed things over the years, like large humanoid footprints that were almost certainly made by the wild man. Then I've seen anomalies in the wood. You know, branches being dislodged and shaped into specific ways, like an invisible marking system that only the wild man would understand. So, yes, I know they're out there. Your grandmother saw one once, when she was out berry picking in the woods one day. I do remember that. She said everything in the woods became eerily quiet. The birds' song dissipated. She got the overwhelming sense she was being watched. Then something made her glance towards a maple tree. And there was this tall creature, completely covered in hair, just staring at her, with such an intense fascination. But once it realized it had been seen, it glided away. Of course, when she told me her story, she kept saying, "Marcus, it happened so quickly. I keep asking myself, did I really see that?" But she knew that she had. But such a sighting is hard to get your head around. I visited my Gramps' cabin for many years after that, successfully managing to avoid those trips to Nantucket to stay with my Aunt Hilda until he died about 30 years ago. My family now own the quintessential old cabin that used to belong to my grandfather and carry on the age-old tradition of enjoying it for short holidays. I seriously regret to say that I never saw the creature that I shared the cigar with all those years ago, that I now know to be a Bigfoot. I seriously regret that. These days I enjoy the same Cuban cigars my Gramps smoked when I was a young boy. And when I light them with the gold lighter that I inherited, and I open up the cellophane packaging and inhale the delicious aromatic smoke, I certainly think of the day I smoked my first cigar with a creature that I now know to be a Bigfoot. So there you are. That's my story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I drove down the familiar dirt road. The rubber wheels of my bright pink Jeep Wrangler had not graced this long driveway for over a year now. It seemed strange to be back here again in Iowa for the very first time in ages, returning to the old Richard family farmhouse where I had spent so many relaxing summer afternoons playing with my two best friends, Tammy Wilson and Sally Ann Richards, in our younger days. I had known those two girls since I was knee-high to a grasshopper when I was tottering around in nappies, as our parents had been lifelong friends, socializing and interacting together. After we left home to further our studies, we had always agreed that we would meet up here on the Richards family farm on the 15th of November every single year without fail. It seemed like a savvy way of keeping the connection between us alive. We all feared that we would lose touch one day, going our separate ways, making new friends, moving to other parts of the state, getting married, having babies, starting up a whole new life a world away from Iowa. It could so easily happen. The power of distraction is a natural threat. It lies in wait for you with the stealth and cunning of a tiger, pouncing on you unaware in the dark shadows, where she drags you under her forceful hold. Everything goes awry as the natural routines of daily life, the responsibilities, commitments, appointments all take hold, enough to sever the strongest of friendships. It was something we all feared and dreaded, as the idea of our friendship wilting away like a wild flower in an open field and dying was not something we were open to accepting. Granted, we did have the advantage of social media, but for us that bore little comparison from spending real physical quality time together. Growing up, we'd been as close as sisters, possibly closer. The one thing we all had in common is that we were all late lambs in our family. We were that unheralded present delivered to the front door so impetuously. My mother only discovered she was pregnant with me 6 months on, when she thought she was going through the perimenopause, while Sally Ann's father had a failed vasectomy. And as for Tammy Wilson, her mother went around town telling everybody that she was suffering dreadfully with the menopause. She talked about the menopause as if it was a contagious, infectious disease that you certainly didn't want to catch. It's a very real phenomenon, she told her alarmed friends, who were now living with a rising level of trepidation as they wondered who would be next to experience the hot flushes associated with the change of life. I've got it earlier than usual. Just my rotten luck. My hormones are flying all over the place like dandelion seeds. My mind is as wobbly as jello. I can't even remember a thing. My memory's like a sieve. I've become so clumsy, dropping things everywhere, all over the place. I feel nauseous and sick all the time, but luckily I can only say that I don't have those awful hot flushes they talk about. But the menopause belly, it's a dreadful condition. They never warn you about it. They never tell you how really bad it is on those television health programmes, she said, her eyes growing really wide. I think they don't want to alarm women of just how bad it really is. And the weight, oh, that's impossible to shift. I've tried every exercise, every diet, but my belly is growing like a balloon every single day, getting bigger and bigger. It's so inflated, my husband says I look like a beach ball. I think it might be exasperated by an allergy to dairy, as that can really blow you up. It never occurred to her that she might just be pregnant. One day it happened on her kitchen floor of all things, when her waters suddenly broke. Out popped little Tammy. As her husband put it so eloquently, I left in the morning for work as a father of 3, to return home as a father of 4. It was quite remarkable. Very, very remarkable. I'm one happy man. Of course, all 3 fathers were really thrilled to be dads again. It seemed that Sally Ann's father believed he was startlingly virile. He had overcome, conquered, defeated a vasectomy. It was something he never failed to boast about to all and sundry, as if somehow he had accomplished an awe-inspiring feat, like climbing Mount Everest or swimming across the English Channel. He wore his illustrious acclaim like a badge of honour on his lapel. Going back as to why I was returning to the Richards family farm, well, it was the 15th of November again, the fixed date whereby we would meet up at least once a year. My mother had suggested this phenomenal idea to me. She seriously regretted losing touch with so many of her former hometown friends after university, whom she never heard from again. She really regretted that. So far, the plan had worked seamlessly, as for 3 straight years we'd never failed to meet up on this particular date. It wouldn't be a train smash if the date had to be altered, but luckily to date that hadn't actually happened. I had grown up here in Iowa, the land of luxurious rolling plains that sprawled out for an eternity, along with miles upon miles of pretty prodigious cornfields. I was raised here on a corn farm myself, not too far away from the Richards family farm, close to Highway 63 or thereabouts. Time had flown by so fast, so speedily. Where had it got to, I thought, as my car rolled past the wide-open meadows where the green grass was beginning to become bespeckled by yellow patches. Then there were clusters and clusters of hardwood trees, from maple, northern pecan, chestnut and black walnut trees, the latter being the most abundant tree on the farm. They stood together like towering tall strangers, covered with vast bushy heads of now yellow-green hair that contrasted superbly with the black bark. It was an exquisitely stunning November day in autumn, which wasn't unpleasant for the beginning of winter, as there were some pretty prisms of sunlight dancing all over the valley. But it was significantly colder, as there was a real bite to the air. I could feel my heart fluttering with excitement at the thought of seeing Sally Ann and Tammy again. It was so thrilling. Yet I also felt nervous. I often worried that we would change, become different people, lose that close connection that had anchored us together as friends for so long, like boats moored together at the harbour. Finally, I reached the custom-made farmhouse that had been on this land as long as I could remember, but it was considered quite modern in its day. It was made from dark brown painted timber, with large glass windows, along with fabulous entertainment areas with floor-to-ceiling glass sliding doors that led from the living area onto the wrap-around porch that snuggled the house ever so tightly. It overlooked resplendent panoramic views of the idyllic Iowa countryside. My car engine purred as I navigated up the drive towards the parking bay that was fringed by some youthful oak trees. I pulled up the handbrake, switching off the engine, my eyes drawn to the front door. I could see a hazy silhouette, then a figure. It was Sally Ann, standing directly outside the bright red front door of her home, her blue eyes meandering towards my car. I could see her face looked animated. She was excited to see me. I glanced at her. Oh, she looked so pretty. Her pixie face sported a modern shag, a rather contemporary hairstyle enhanced with a few contrasting highlights in ash blondes and pale reds. It suddenly hit me how grown up she appeared. She looked like an elegant young woman now, not the naughty wild blonde-haired child I remembered playing with as a young girl. She ran towards me, her hair bobbing up and down, her blue eyes sparkling, flinging me into her arms in what I can only describe as the warmest, most compact hug. For a moment I thought she wasn't going to let me go. She was squeezing me so tightly I could barely breathe. "Tanya," she said, tears spilling down her cheeks, "it's been too long, far too long. I've missed you so much." "Don't get me started," I said, hugging her back, feeling the misty tears rising up in the back of my eyes. It felt so good to be together again, even if I was coming up for air like an oxygen-starved goldfish. Then it was Tammy's turn to arrive. She did not escape the exuberant tight clutches from Sally Ann either, who welcomed her like a rambunctious Jack Russell who hadn't seen his owner in years. I could see her pale skin looked flushed with delight. She was ever so pleased to have been welcomed so enthusiastically by Sally Ann. She looked gorgeous as well, in an emerald green long-sleeved dress, while her long dark hair swept back elegantly in what appeared to be a pretty knot. It felt like we'd never been parted. "We're having an autumn barbecue," said Sally Ann, bubbling over with enthusiasm. She guided us through the opulent-looking entrance hall, with its stunning pieces of contemporary artwork, taking pride of place on the wall, through to the very stylish living area, swathed in luxurious furnishings done in rich golds and reds, onto the porch, where her father was manning the meat that he was cooking on a rather swanky open grill. I could smell those delicious nostalgic campfire smells that wafted over the patio, sizzling proteins, lipids, aromatic herbs, fruity smells that titillated my taste buds, causing my stomach to rumble hungrily. "It's good to see you kids together again," he said, greeting us warmly as he flipped some burgers over on the grill. "It's been a long time, far too long. It makes me feel quite the old man, seeing how you've all grown up like this. Don't mind me. I'm cooking you lunch, leaving you to it, as Sally Ann has made it clear to me that parents aren't welcomed to your little tete-a-tete." "So you're not invited to our lunch, Mr. Richards, but you'll do nicely as the cook waiting on our every need," I teased. "Something like that," he chuckled. "Sally Ann has me well trained." "Oh, there you are," said Sally Ann's mother, rushing towards me, and to Tammy with open arms. Thankfully her hug was not as suffocating as her daughter's, but her welcome was intense. "So lovely to see the both of you. It feels like the good old days again, seeing you back here on the farm with us. My word, haven't you both grown into such beautiful young-looking women? It seems like only the other day you were running around in your nappies. It so grieves my heart that children grow up so fast these days." "You never know," I teased. "Maybe your husband's vasectomy will give again." "Not a chance," laughed Mrs. Richards. "That goose is well and truly cooked, I can assure you. I think we can safely say there will be no more late lambs." Before long, Sally Ann's parents had left us alone, and we were eating a delicious barbecue, with all the trimmings washed down with the finest French champagne. After we toasted each other, Sally was telling us that she had a party game planned for us. In this hat I have some papers with questions in it. I ask you to tell the truth, that's all. Would you like to pick out a card, she asked me. All right, I said. Here goes. I read it. When did you first kiss a boy? I flushed, the pink colour rising in my face. Well, I was about 8 years old. I kissed Tommy Piper, do you remember him? Behind the Wendy house, in our backyard. He ran away from me, crying, never spoke to me again for years. Every time he came to our house, he would cling to his mother. He was terrified I'd kiss him again. But you ended up dating him anyway when you were 18, said Sally Ann, looking surprised. What made you kiss him? I don't know. I guess I always rather liked him. It wasn't even planned. I just did it. But it freaked him out. Your turn, said Sally Ann, handing over the hat to Tammy, who took her time shuffling the papers around inside it. Finally, she pulled out a little piece. It read, Have you ever stolen anything? And if so, what and why? Tammy flushed. I have, actually. One day when I was little, my brother asked me to look after his pet hamster. He was going away on a Boy Scout camp. I was so thrilled about being given the responsibility of looking after his little pet. It was a white hamster. I accidentally left the cage open. The cat killed it. I was absolutely mortified, too terrified to tell anyone what had happened. So when my mother went to the pet shop that day to buy some more pet food, I tagged along with her and went to play with the hamsters in the shop. When the owner wasn't looking, I stole a white hamster, stuffing the poor thing in my knickers. You're kidding, I said. You stuffed it in your knickers? I did. I'm not kidding. It seemed like the perfect hiding place where it wouldn't be seen. It was wiggling around frantically, but when I got home, he was absolutely fine, thankfully. When my brother returned from his break a couple of weeks later, his white hamster actually gave birth to several little babies. He couldn't understand it because he had a boy hamster. How had it managed to morph into a girl? But I never told him a single thing. Wow, that really is some story. Did you ever confess to him about what you'd done when you were older? No, not on your Nelly. He'd never forgive me if I did. It's your turn now, I said to Sally Ann, handing her over the hat. She pulled out a piece of paper and read it. A secret you have kept from everyone. A secret you haven't told. It must come out right now. Sally's face grew grave. She stammered for a moment, as if she wasn't sure whether to tell us or not, which was a real bummer, as we had been friends for years. What was she holding back, I wondered? We told each other everything. Well, I thought we had. Come on, Sally, out with it, I said. Fair's fair. We've told you our deepest, darkest secrets. Now it's your turn. When I was 15 years old, I had an encounter with a Bigfoot. What? Piped Tammy and I together in astonishment. You never told us. We're your best friends. Why didn't you tell us? I'm not sure, said Sally. I just couldn't tell anybody. This was the story she told us. My parents had invited 2 couples over for lunch. I'm not sure who they were, as I'd never seen them before. I think they were connected with my father's work in some way. It wasn't uncommon for him to invite random guests over to lunch. I do remember my father saying that it was important to make a good impression on them. They were rather nice people, so I thought, friendly. I remember the one lady had a French accent, a very stylish, elegant woman she was, called Françoise. She was wearing an eclectic, long, stylish black dress with a big pendant on it. I remember thinking that she wouldn't look out of place at the Tate Art Gallery, talking to customers about great works of art done by some of the masters. She looked like, very artsy, but stylish, polished, classy at the same time. You could tell she was a passionate woman with a very engaging personality, the kind of person that would make an impact if she entered a room. Like that. It worried the heck out of me that she was chatting up my father so obviously. I could sense and feel a powerful attraction brewing between the two of them, but while my father remained indifferent, she looked quite predatory. I think Dad was thrilled to finally meet someone who shared his enthusiastic passion for contemporary art. Mum had never understood or appreciated his interest in art, but this woman, she clearly did. It was like Mum was blindly oblivious to the way Françoise was eyeing my dad up, like a rather ravenous female praying mantis. Well, you know how my mother can be so gullible, so over-trusting, fleeceable and naive. Well, she positively encouraged my father to go and show Françoise all his artwork, some of it that's stored in the outside barn away from the house. That really got me concerned. I remember trying to put a halt to it. I told Mum that Dad's stuff is all wrapped up in bubble wrap in the barn, that it would be such a huge monumental mission for him to unwrap all that work, just to show Françoise. My mother said, "Oh, don't be so silly, Sally Ann. If Françoise is interested in your father's artwork, I don't think he'd mind unwrapping all that bubble wrap to show her some of his precious pieces." I thought I was going to throw up. I remember Françoise fluttered her fake eyelashes. She said, "Well, if it's not too much trouble, I really would be rather fascinated." That was when alarm bells began ringing loudly in my head. I was terrified that Françoise was going to pounce on my unsuspecting father. "You didn't trust your father with this woman?" I asked. "More like I didn't trust Françoise with my father. I mean, she looked like the type that aggressively pursued her quarry, a woman that hunts for the men she wants to seduce. I could predict that she would try and wheedle her way around my dad the moment she had him all to herself. I could just envisage it all happening. What troubled me the most is that Françoise was not the kind of woman you could reject very easily. She had an ego on her that would make a male lion look rather small. So once my father had shown her the artwork in the house, he proceeded to take her outside towards the barn. So I trailed surreptitiously behind them, keeping myself well out of sight. Once they'd finished opening up the pieces of art, I could hear the oohing and aahing, you know how they go over this and that. And then they came out of the barn, talking and laughing together, discussing some of the work. Françoise became blatantly flirtatious. They were about to return to the house to join the rest of the guests when I heard her say, "I really love black walnut trees, especially at this time of the year. Why don't you show me your woodgrove? I'm really interested." My heart began to sink as I sensed that Françoise wanted a great deal more from my father than just art and trees, much more than the woodgrove itself. She wanted to frolic in the hay. That was what was on the cards for her. I just knew it. I felt it and sensed it in every part of my being. Françoise was saying, "I see that you and your wife don't share the same passion for art. It seems such a pity that you have so little in common with her." "Well, we may not have a lot in common when it comes to art, but we do connect in other areas," my father commented. "But do you really?" she said, stirring the pot deliberately, putting her hands up against my father, pushing him hard against the trunk of a tree, where she teasingly began to slide her long, painted, manicured, elegant fingers down the contours of his face, down his neck, and across his chest. My father looked a little alarmed, rather like a caged animal, not knowing quite how to react. He wasn't expecting this. He was completely caught off guard. I'd been following them closely and was peering behind a tree, watching this intimate moment unfold before my eyes between my father and Françoise. I wasn't happy, not one bit. I wasn't sure how to intercede, to break up this cosy, booming, romantic interlude that had the potential to get totally out of hand. All of a sudden, I heard a chattering sound. I looked up, and there was this huge creature hiding behind a large black walnut tree. His long, flowing dark hair was exactly the same colour as the bark itself. Very, very dark. At first, the creature just stood up. I worked out that it must have been about 8 foot tall. It could have been a youngster. It was lean, lanky, not really filled out yet. Its shoulders were exceedingly broad. It struck me as muscular, sinewy, powerfully strong, with overlong arms, a cone-shaped head, a hairless, leathery grey face, with a pronounced brow ridge, high cheekbones, flat nose, thin mouth, and deep-set dark eyes. The Bigfoot was watching my father and Françoise interacting together. He seemed to find it terribly comical. He was shaking his arch-shaped head from side to side, backwards and forwards, going, "Ah, ah, ah, ah," as if he was laughing at them. I'm almost positive that that is exactly what he was doing. He studied their body language very intently, very curiously. He began to imitate their actions precisely. He was impersonating Françoise to a T, who was now putting her arms around my father's neck and pouting as she leaned forward to kiss him on the lips. The Bigfoot copied Françoise's action, using his own body. He placed his overlong arms around himself, hugging himself, tracing the contours of his own high cheekbones, using the edges of his huge hands, just like Françoise had done on my father. Then he rounded his thin grey lips into a pout. He began to smooch the air, smacking his lips together, as if he was kissing. This extraordinary creature was replicating, acting out, if you like, Françoise's flirtatious advances so seamlessly towards my father. He portrayed my father's shocked reactions. I watched him suddenly widen his eyes like my dad had done, and look totally startled and shocked. I was laughing so much that I stuffed the corner of my shirt in my mouth so that my father could not hear me. That was when I heard my father say, "You're a very attractive woman, Françoise. It's so good to meet someone so interested in contemporary art like you. But I am a married man with children. I couldn't cheat on my wife. She is my very best friend. I'm very flattered. If I wasn't married, well, things would be very different, I'm sure." I'm not going to deny the fact that I was so thrilled to hear my father reject Françoise's amorous advances. She didn't take it at all well. She stamped her foot like a belligerent child. She said, "You're pathetic. You don't know a good thing when it's staring you blindly in the face. Have you ever heard of just letting your hair down, having a little bit of fun? What your wife doesn't know won't hurt her." "Oh, but it will," said my father. "It would prickle my conscience too much to ever cheat on her." "I might have known you were a complete loser," she said, storming back to the house. The Bigfoot copied Françoise's stamping movements. I saw my father running after her. I think he was telling her not to overreact or to take offence. But I don't think she was listening. She was very upset. "So what happened after that?" I asked. "Well, I think the Bigfoot suddenly saw me watching him. He became quite reticent, actually. I don't think he realised he had such an appreciative audience. I remember his eyes twinkled with humour, but I also know he was painfully shy on seeing me. He just turned around, glided away. I did try running after him, but he vanished from my sight. He was gone. I never saw him again." "Well, you've trumped all of us with your story, Sally Ann," I said. "I can't believe you saw a Bigfoot. I feel positively overshadowed by you. To think that you've kept this from us for so long just boggles my mind. That all happened several years ago. Even though I'm married now with a toddler, I'm glad to inform you that I still meet up with my two very best friends on the same date every single year, as some things in life are worth preserving, and those are friendships. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah, my name is Hilda, and I live in the heart of the Tennessee countryside, in a beautiful mountain home, on the edge of a rural dirt road that is both remote and well off the beaten track. My gorgeous Swiss-style wooden cabin is surrounded by beautiful rolling green valleys and ubiquitous trees that literally stretch out into vast areas of ongoing forest that seem to just spread out for eternity. I also have a couple of glorious ponds on my land that have been here for over 100 years and are a wonderful place for the deer to congregate, where they enjoy a cool drink on a hot summer's day. I am not married, but I live here alone with my two yellow Labradors called Tumbles and Twix, and they are the most faithful companions that you could ever ask for, especially when you live on your own. I do have two grown-up children now who live in Germany and have long since flown the nest, but we always keep in touch by using Skype on a regular basis, which I find wonderful. My children spent their childhood growing up here in the Tennessee mountain air, and they have the most wonderful recollections of their childhood here. One thing my children are unanimous about is their belief that something strange was going on in our woods for years. When my children were young, they always said that they saw sightings of strange orbs and heard disembodied voices that they would hear when they were playing in our yard. My youngest child claimed to have seen the hooded figures of monks chanting in the woods from time to time. At that time, I dismissed her claims as fanciful thinking, but now, all these years later, I wasn't so sure. Well, not anymore. It is inevitable that over the years, living in this part of the world, you get to hear the usual animal calls during the night, like crickets, frogs, coyotes and owls, and the occasional wolf. But there have also been times when I've heard other strange sounds that I just could not identify, like whooping sounds, wood knocking, and very strange screams that were so alarming it would leave my hair standing on end. One day, long after my children had flown the nest, I noticed other unexplainable sounds that came directly from the woods, and it sounded exactly like monks chanting, and it was so hard to explain. All I knew was that I would wake up in the middle of the night to hear this mysterious chanting, and it sounded eerily supernatural. I remember my younger child telling me of her visual sightings of these monks. Now the skeptic in me was beginning to wonder if there was more to her story than I had ever envisaged. I had always avoided walking in the woods for some unexplained reason. Perhaps on an unconscious level, I was intimidated by those forests, because it would seem that something oddly menacing, almost evil, was always watching me from those woods. It was on a bright summer's morning, when the sunlight filtered across the valley in streams of beautiful golden light, that I heard that mystical, esoteric monk music coming from the woods all over again. It was such a crystal clear kind of noise that you could be forgiven for believing that someone had actually set up a sound system in the clearing, and I found the music was drawing me into the woods with a seductive intrigue. So, armed with my rifle in my hands, I took Tumble and Twix in the woods for a walk. I did feel safe with them by my side. As I entered the wooded clearing, the deep chanting sounds became louder and louder and clearer and clearer. There was a gentle breeze blowing, and I saw this cloudy, smoky haze drifting past me, just like smoke, and it smelt exactly like frankincense and myrrh, and was surprisingly very uplifting. Suddenly I saw two hooded, cloaked figures wearing brown robes with rope sashes tied around their middles and leather-thong sandals on their feet. These men looked exactly like monks, and I could not see their faces clearly, but I noticed the hands were clasped in prayer, and it seemed that they were in a deep meditative state. Yet all this time the mysterious chanting continued to fill the forest with a mystical, supernatural ambience, which was not of this world. But I will tell you this, it was enchantingly beautiful. As I drew closer to the monks, I watched them literally glide through the wall of a dense thicket and then vanish before my sight, just like a pair of ghosts. I was intrigued by what I'd seen, and the experience left me feeling serenely mellow. At the same time, I wondered if I'd really seen those monks, or whether my imagination was in some kind of magical overdrive. But smelling the lingering wafts of woody incense convinced me that what I had seen was indeed real. Both Tumbles and Twix were not afraid of these strange ghostly figures, but were actually wagging their tails furiously, like they would do in the presence of a lovely friend, and it was their ease and joyful countenance that encouraged me to proceed further into the woods with a fearless eagerness. I noticed that so many tree branches in the woods were twisted into strange angles, and it really did look as if it had been intentionally done, but I knew it would take a great deal of skill and a huge amount of strength to be able to manipulate and twist branches in such a way, especially without managing to break them. Then there were other branches that appeared to be purposely snapped. I also noticed trees that were turned upside down to expose the roots, and they looked so sinister and menacing, almost like a large blazing red sign saying, "Get out!" It was almost as if something or someone was marking their territory, in a strange kind of mystical Morse code. Finally, I came across these strange teepee-looking structures, but they looked like statuesque markers of some kind, which had symbolic meaning behind them. So it really felt like the forest was ablaze with these odd symbols, which was a signing system I did not understand or comprehend. But I did get a very clear message from them, and it was, "Get out!" I did get also the sense of being an intruder in these woods and interrupting something that was not for my eyes to see. But I was curious, and it was with this eager enthusiasm to explore further that urged me to walk deeper into the heart of the forest. I finally came to an open clearing, and I noticed on the left there was a very large nest there, and that was strewn with layers upon layers of twigs, branches and hay, and it looked like something big was using the space as a sleeping area. But what kind of creature was resting there, I wondered. Whatever it was, it had to be huge, because the nest was massive. Strewn in the right-hand corner of the nest was a pile of animal carcasses of what the creature had been eating, and there were carcasses of hog, deer, squirrel, coon, and rabbit, piled up in a huge heap without discrimination. So whatever this predator was, he or she was eating well and eating almost anything and everything in sight. It was clearly still living here, because there was a half-eaten squirrel on the pile, still waiting to be devoured. My dog was not happy when he smelt the nest. Neither of them were. It was like they sensed that whatever this predator was, it was something that clearly terrified them. They were whimpering uneasily, and their tails were tucked in between their legs in submissive resignation. It was weird because everything in the forest suddenly became eerily quiet, and the only way I can describe it was as if someone turned all the background noises off, because there was no bird song anymore, and it became deathly still. I want to tell you that an experience like this is utterly unnerving, and I was determined to get out of this creepy, sinister forest as quickly and as fast as I could. I was about to turn around and go back to my cabin when I sensed these steely, evil eyes watching me, and it was the most terrifying feeling that I have ever experienced in my entire life. I really got the sense that a powerful predator was stalking me, and that I might be next on his dinner menu. It was amazing how I just sensed him there, even though I could not physically see him. Believe me, sometimes not seeing the threat face to face can be worse than actually seeing it, because you don't know what the impending threat actually is. You have no idea where it's coming from, or when it may just suddenly pounce out on you in surprise. Suddenly those terrible fears of mine were confirmed when I heard this low guttural growl that sounded more intimidating than the roar of a lion, and I found myself freezing up like a block of ice. Ah! I noticed that both my dogs were feeling it too, as they lay at my feet, seemingly paralyzed by an overwhelming fear. Ah! Ah! I could see some shrubbery moving towards my left, and the branches of a small tree swaying to and fro and backwards and forwards. I really felt that this thing, whatever it was, clearly wanted to scare me half to death, and it was working because I was filled with an overwhelming sense of impending dread. Suddenly I got the whiff of the most deplorable odour you could ever imagine smelling. It smelt like a decaying corpse, and once I had smelt a dead body in my life, and if anything could be worse than that smell, this was it. It was utterly foul and very sweet and sickly. Then I heard this thunderous sound that sounded exactly like a crash of thunder, and then bolting through a barrage of thorny, dense thicket like a huge bulldozer was the deadliest predator that I have ever seen in my entire life. A creature like the likes of such I have never seen before, and I hope to never see again as long as I live. This creature was a humanoid bipedal ape of about 10 feet tall and easily 1,100 pounds, and he was covered in thick, dense, short black hair with a large white ribbon-like stripe down his back. He had the most gargantuan shoulders with a huge, massive torso that made the rest of his body seem almost willowy by contrast. But I promise you, there was nothing small about this thing. He had long arms so typical of primates and slightly shorter legs that appeared strong and muscular. The head was elongated like a cone, and the grey-skinned face was graced with long white wispy beard. But this creature was otherwise hairless on the face, with a very big flat nose, deep-set eyes, a large thin mouth, and a very prominent brow ridge. Furious brown eyes regarded me with murderous rage, and he was seething, and the message was clear. He wanted me dead. I definitely sensed he was only interested in one thing, and that was adding me to the large pile of skeletal remains on his nesting area, along with his half-eaten squirrel. I stood there paralysed with fear, and so immobilised I simply could not manoeuvre my clumsy fingers to pull back the trigger. Believe me, I tried, because my life hung in the balance, but this creature had a powerful emotional and mental hold over me that was so incapacitating that I simply could not use my rifle. This hairy humanoid ape lunged towards me and grabbed my rifle, tossing it in the air in absolute disgust, and then he threw it across the forest floor, and I heard it crashing on the ground with a loud almighty thud. Now I was well and truly at the mercy of this thing, whatever on earth it was. It rarely looked like a creature you would expect to see only in your darkest nightmares. It was between me and him now, and I stood no chance against this hairy giant. My life flashed before my eyes, and I found myself wondering how long it would take for him to kill me. I was praying that my dying process would not hurt, because I knew that my life was finally over. There was no doubt about that in my mind, and it was so surprising because in those seconds I began to accept my horrifying fate, because it was a realm that was out of my control. Suddenly my dog Twix, who had always been protective of me, overcame his incredible fear for some unexplainable reason, and jumped up and nipped this creature very hard several times. And believe me, that was a bold thing to do to a predator like this. Suddenly the creature let out an immobilizing, furious roar, because my dog had dared to challenge him. I do not believe that anything had ever taken this creature on before, not even one of his own kind. He was a monstrous bully that always got his own way because of the terror that he would orchestrate among his victims. That I was certain of. My dog's bites clearly infuriated him. In an outburst of extreme rage, he grabbed Twix and was about to throttle him to death, and with a single blow of his mighty hands. But I could not stand back and watch this creature tear my precious dog apart. In that moment I screamed at the top of my lungs, "No! No! No! Please, no! You can't do that!" And then I courageously lunged towards the creature and poked my fingers and sharp long nails directly into both of its eyes, semi-blinding him in the process with a powerful force that even surprised me. I suppose that I knew I had nothing to lose. I might as well die fighting back as hard as I could. I believe my dogs had come to a very similar conclusion, because their fear had been taken over with an instinctive desire to fight back and to protect me as hard as they could. It seemed like their fear had magically dissipated. The creature let out a huge, pathetic whimpering sound, which seemed utterly ridiculous, coming from such an intimidating predator. He was clearly in pain, and he cradled his painful eyes in his massive cupped hands. In that second, my dogs and I wasted no time and ran away as fast as we could out of that forest. Suddenly I heard the sound of that chanting music, and I could smell that strange incense all over again. And in that moment, an overwhelming sense of peace and calm came over my entire body. And I noticed that even my dog's nature had transformed, and they were wagging their tails as if nothing had happened. I looked back into the forest, and that was when I saw two cloaked figures of the monks walking away and disappearing into the undergrowth. I knew something outer-worldly had happened in that forest, and as crazy as it may sound, I believe I was helped by those ghostly monks. They had been like guardian angels to me. I was certain of that. I just remember the incapacitating fear that paralyzed me so much, but suddenly it was like the trance-like hold that this hairy humanoid had over me was shattered like glass and replaced by an extreme desire to fight back, which not only miraculously affected me, but Twix and also the other dog, with a boldness that neither of us naturally possessed. I have no idea why I chose to aim for this creature's eyes, and even now I marvel at how I did this, because I literally disabled the creature for long enough to escape from those woods with both my life and the lives of my two devoted dogs still intact. After this incident, I did some research on my property, and I found that in the 1800s, the ground that I was living on was used as a retreat for monks, and during one of those retreats, two of the monks were killed on the land by a rogue mountain lion. It made me feel even more certain that these monks helped me because they had died in the hands of a predatory creature themselves, and so they rescued me from a very similar fate. I told my children in Germany what had happened, and my young girl told me that she had seen those two monks in the forest on several occasions before. She had also smelt the incense and heard the mystical, intriguing chanting. She said that she had always felt that those monks were loving, spiritual, godly men. She reminded me of the dreadfully sad time when Panda, our black and white tabby, had gone missing for 2 whole weeks. I prayed so hard for Panda to return home safely, Mum, she said. And then I remembered those ghost-like monks in the woods, and I knew they were godly men. And so I asked them to help me to find Panda. I didn't think that anything would actually happen, but 5 minutes later, Panda appeared in the kitchen, meowing for something to eat. It was then, Mum, she told me, I knew that those monks had helped me, and I believe they helped you too, by enabling you to escape from that dangerous creature, by giving you supernatural courage and strength, as well as the 2 dogs of ours. For a long time I could not put a name to that strange creature that I'd seen in the forest that day, but now I believe he fits the profile of being a Bigfoot, a Sasquatch, or a hairy man. I still sometimes hear that strange esoteric music on our land. I do not think the monks are trapped here at all, but I think they come and visit us from time to time, the place that was once a retreat to them, and also because it was the place where they encountered that deadly mountain lion. I believe they do revisit me from time to time, and I can hear them with their music filtering across the valley. All I can say is that that is the most phenomenal story.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I had been sagaciously and very wisely warned about Mrs. Bonnet when I started working at the local florist's. I'd learnt that she was rather tough on her staff, would not stand for anyone ever arriving late. By all accounts, I was thoroughly enjoying my job. It was the quintessential opportunity to be away from home for a change and to express my creativity. When you have young children to organise in the early mornings to get off to school, it's never easy. There are invariably always delays, as my kids could not find a missing shoe at the very last minute, or something like that usually our mischievous dog Scruffball had somehow squirreled away under the sofa, along with a plethora of other items that he always hides away. I mean, what, I ask you, does a dog want with a hairbrush, a pair of nail clippers, a ball of wool, 3 odd socks, Lego blocks, a headless Barbie, and a teddy bear? But you name it, Scruffball was always hiding everything away. Ironically, it was always the very thing you were looking for at the last minute that seamlessly had vanished off the face of the planet. On this occasion, looking for my son's shoe had consumed all our precious time I could ill afford to lose. Then there were other times when I'd taken my kids to school and my daughter Cindy informed me that she had forgotten her lunchbox at home. So I had to drive all the way back to get it for her, as I couldn't have my kids starving at school, or what kind of a mother would that make me? Now anyone who's ever had children will comprehend what I'm talking about. Every morning it's like an obstacle course to get your children ready for school. It's not just about dressing yourself and getting yourself together, but two rambunctious, adrenalised kids as well, that would be likely to leave their heads behind if given the chance. Of course, they never tell you when you decide to have kids of all the challenges along the way. How hard to find any time for yourself it's going to be. I had come to a place in my life that I was literally yearning and longing for adult company, as looking after both my kids and talking to them expeditiously all day about Eddie the Turtle and Ronnie the Octopus in one of their storybooks was becoming laboriously prosaic. I think if I heard my kid talk about Ronnie's wandering tentacles one more time, I would quite literally go bananas. Don't get me wrong, I'm very glad I had kids. I have no regrets on that score. But I never knew just how enervating and debilitating it would be to be watching over my children day in and day out 24/7. How listless, feeble and fatigued I would become. I remember once learning about some birds that lay their eggs in other birds' nests, so another mother of a different species is forced to look after the strange chicklet. When I was young, I thought that lazy mum should be very ashamed of herself. Now I think she's really rather astute. It makes perfect sense to divide the responsibilities when it comes to raising kids, as there's one thing every mother needs, and that's some free time to be her authentic self, along with a good, decent night's sleep. One day my best friend May and I were randomly discussing how to be more efficient mothers, where we could enjoy our kids, but at the very same time have some me time to ourselves. We both emphatically decided that Monday, Tuesdays and Wednesdays I could have that time to myself, while she would take care of my kids after picking them up from school, while on Thursday, Fridays and Saturdays she could do whatever she wanted and I would take her kids under my charge. The arrangement had quite literally transformed our lives. We were like wary, droopy flowers that were suddenly watered and revitalised, becoming bright and colourful again, renewed in our health, energy and personal happiness. Life was 1,000 times better for the both of us, and we now had our personal space. I worked 3 times a week at the florist in town. For me, this was the release I needed from being shackled to my job as a mother. I felt as if my clipped wings had finally grown back, that I could fly all over again. My boss, Miss Bonnet, had given 2 warnings to me for being late. I somehow felt like a reprimanded, admonished school kid for being told off by the headmistress for being a very naughty girl. I wasn't surprised to learn that in her youth Miss Bonnet had been a teacher, which was why in running her florist she did so with an iron fist. She didn't pack any punches either. Lynn, the girl who worked full-time at the florist, assured me that if I was late more than 3 times, I would definitely be sacked. I'm not joking, she warned me. Miss Bonnet can be as tough as old boots. She doesn't take excuses kindly. I promise you she's been through staff as often as you have eaten chocolate. I ate chocolate an awful lot, so that must mean she had got through a plethora of staff. The first time I was late at the florist was when my daughter had thrown up all over her school uniform. I sent her to May's house to recover from her upset stomach, but Miss Bonnet was not sympathetic. I can't abide people being late. I don't listen to petty excuses. You've made arrangements for someone else to take care of your kids, so why the delay? Well, I said, I had to help my daughter wash up all the mess, change into new clothes. Then I dropped her off at May's house. That's still no excuse, she said. None at all. You have someone else looking after your daughter on Monday, Tuesdays and Wednesdays, so why are you making up soppy stories? Have you never heard of delegation before? Isn't that why you've got someone helping you out? Lynn had rolled her eyes in the back of her head as Miss Bonnet lambasted me with a real dressing down. I realised Lynn was absolutely right. I was definitely going to lose my job if I wasn't expediently prompt. If I was going to keep this job, I was going to have to be punctilious and pedantic about all my timekeeping. That was not going to be plain sailing by any manner of means, as sooner or later something would happen that would invariably delay me. I was so enjoying working at the florist. I'd met so many fabulous customers, and I was really relishing making up stunning, beautiful flower arrangements for all our clients, for all kinds of spectacular occasions. One morning my dog Scruffball appeared to be struggling to get sick. I discovered there was a lump in the back of her throat. I began to panic, as something was clearly stuck in her alimentary canal. I was worried that my dog's airway was being blocked. When I took her to the vet, he removed one of my son's soft little plastic lizards that had got caught up in her throat and pulled it out. It came out in one piece, a horizontal shoe-sized bright green lizard, and of course everyone cracked up laughing, while Scruffball looked terribly pleased with herself and very happy to be reunited with the green lizard. But I popped it right back into my purse. Of course, when Miss Bonnet found out why I was late, she wasn't impressed, nor even remotely amused. "You sound as if you live in a circus. You shouldn't be leaving your son's plastic lizard around for your dog to eat. I'm sorry, but this is your second warning." "One more warning, and you're out, Heather." "Miss Bonnet," I said to her, "I think you're being fallaciously unreasonable. I really do." "Well, that's your opinion, dear, and you're entitled to that. But it's not mine. I think it's sapiently judicious for my staff to arrive on time, to keep their houses in apple pie order so that plastic lizards don't get caught up in dogs' esophaguses. Why on earth do you have plastic lizards lying around your house in the first place? I don't understand. Haven't you heard of boxes for toys for your kids?" "Mrs. Bonnet, have you ever had children before?" "No, I have not, dear, and I'm very glad about that. I also have not been weighed down with a husband. I've been on my own all my life, and that works very well for me, thank you very much. You know, Miss Bonnet, if I lived alone, I'd be able to turn up for work like clockwork every day. Things happen when you raise kids. I promise you they do. Sometimes you can't help but run late, because you're not just taking care of yourself, but you're taking care of an entire family. And any woman who's been a mother, in my opinion, is a hero. It's one hell of a tough job. I always say being a mother is the hardest, most underrated and underappreciated job in the entire world. Well, you should have thought about that, dear, before you decided to raise a family, shouldn't you? You know the problem with young people today? They're all far too eager to jump into the sack, failing to consider the long-term inauspicious ramifications of their decisions. Consequently, they fall pregnant, failing abysmally to take charge when the kids arrive on the scene. If you choose to have kids, my dear, then you need to manage them properly. If you decide to keep pets, make sure you don't leave plastic reptiles lying around. It's unambiguously straightforward, not rocket science. "Yes, Miss Bonnet," I said, perceiving that getting through to her would indeed be harder than training Scruffball to stop stealing our stuff and hiding it from us. "Heather," said Miss Bonnet, "I will remind you, this is your second warning. The next time you're late, you will be out. I cannot show staunch favouritism to one member of staff over another. Rules are rules, and they're not made to be broken. Do you understand?" I knew there was no point in expostulating with the woman, so consequently I was literally hanging on a cliff edge by a thin spidery web. One wrong move, I would go plunging from the rocks to the rock pool below with a mighty crash, which meant one thing only. Invariably, Miss Bonnet would sack me. I know it sounds incredulous, but I did get the distinct impression that Miss Bonnet thoroughly enjoyed being officiously bossy and subjugatingly assertive in her business. Being the quintessential top dog, by throwing her weight around, it made her feel validated. Possibly living on her own, she got rather lonely, so dictatorially laying down the law gave her a feeling of significance. "You better watch yourself, Lynn warned me. If you're late again, you're out, Heather. I'm warning you. It's so great having you working here. You're the best florist we've ever had. The trouble with Miss Bonnet, she means well underneath it all. She's not really a bad person, but she believes if you're late that she's personally being duped or being cheated. She has no comprehension of the challenges we face every day to get to work on time. She's very old school in her thinking, fastidiously set in her ways, I'm afraid." Then it happened, and I knew I was running late for work. There was not a jot I could do about it. It was one of those days when I didn't really have a valid excuse for running late at all. I guess I got out of bed the wrong side, and after that everything spiraled out of control, in the way that invariably always does. Little did I know that the wisest thing I could possibly do was to stay in bed, as things on this day would take a menacing turn that would leave an indelible imprint on my life. I managed to get my kids to school on time, but I was only wearing a tracksuit, so I needed to get home to get dressed. Then I struggled to find anything to wear. By the time I got into my SUV to go to the florist's, let's just say I knew that today was the day that I would lose my job. I climbed into my truck. I was already 15 minutes late, and I hadn't even got there yet. I had a huge lump at the back of my throat. My stomach muscles were clenching tightly and churning. I could feel the nausea rising up in the back of my throat and taste the bitter bile on the back of my tongue. I knew that my excuse today would not cut it with Miss Bonnet. I could not pull the wool over that formidable woman's eyes. The other 2 times I was late I had rather good excuses, and that had not been satisfactory enough for Miss Bonnet. But this time I had no excuse for my apathy or dawdling or procrastination, so I tried to think quickly on my feet about what I should say to her to excuse my lateness, but nothing seemed appropriate. The age-old adage, "the dog ate my kids' homework," would never wash with the likes of Miss Bonnet. Even if I told her I had to rush my kid to accident and emergency, she would probably not bat an eyelid. So I truly didn't know what I would say. I parked in the parking bay at the back of the florist, dashing out of my SUV as fast as I possibly could, slamming the car door behind me. I dashed hurriedly to the glass door of the florist. Who should be standing there in the doorway but Miss Bonnet herself? Let's just say she looked like a vulture waiting to pounce on a bloody carcass with her sharp talons, and I was that carcass. She had her hands resting defiantly on her hips. If looks could kill, she was wearing that murderous, reproachful look in her button-brown eyes that seemed incensed. I remember thinking in that moment that this thin, scraggly woman looked exactly like a vulture. It certainly helped that she had a beak-shaped nose. I could discern that the cantankerous, disagreeable woman was quite literally seething. Her oval jaw was clenched so tightly, I was almost certain she was grinding her teeth. "Good morning, Heather, dear," she said sarcastically. "Or should we say good afternoon? Now pray tell me." She paused for a moment. "Now let's see. Did your dog get a lizard stuck in his throat this morning? Or did your daughter throw up all over her dress? Now what is your excuse this time? Or has the cat got your tongue?" "None of that, Miss Bonnet," I said with a pleading, beseechful expression on my face. Miss Bonnet led me into her office. It was a smart room, where she often saw clients when they came to discuss flowers for weddings, funerals, or special occasions. The office was remarkably clean, meticulous. The oakwood desk gleamed. I was almost hesitant to sit down on the ostentatious chairs. They were so grand, upholstered in a very sumptuous, grandiose, velvety fabric. "Sit down," said Mrs. Bonnet, looking at me with a steely gaze, with eyes so penetrating that made me shiver uneasily. "I'm very disappointed in you, Heather. You're 25 minutes late today. Now what do you have to say for yourself, young lady?" I hung my head in shame, feeling like a schoolgirl, again explaining my atrocious behaviour to the teacher. "Miss Bonnet, I truly am sorry about being late. I really am. I'd love to say that the dog ate my kids' homework, but that didn't happen," I said, trying to add some humour to the heavy, oppressive atmosphere in the room that was so claustrophobic it was cloying. I felt like a conspicuous mouse, trapped and being rounded up by the nasty household cat that had no intentions of dealing with me kindly. I was not going to leave this place unscathed without being pummelled alive by some very sharp claws, and humiliated and shamed in the process. The look on Mrs. Bonnet's thunderous face became increasingly more overcast, rather like a sky that's about to rumble with thunder and flash with lightning strikes. I watched her thin mouth turn downwards into a deep scowl. "You think you're being funny, Heather? You think you can joke about things like this, do you? You're recklessly irresponsible. You think it's no big deal arriving to work late, is that it? Do you know I take a dim view of people arriving to work late? You know what this means, Heather?" It was my mouth this time that turned down into a scowl, while my blue eyes filled with tears. "Miss Bonnet," I pleaded, "I really love my job here at the florist. In truth, it's saved my life. It really has. It's given me an escapism from my children. I find it a fabulous creative outlet where I can express myself. I meet so many wonderful people here. I've made many of our customers terribly happy here with my arrangements. I've also developed great relationships with people." "Well, if you love your job, Heather, then you should have looked after it, shouldn't you? Like anything you care about. But if you failed on 3 occasions to arrive at work on time, I have no option but to tell you to leave today," she said, scribbling down my cheque and handing it to me. "That's what I owe you in your wages. I'm sorry, Heather, that has come to this, but I have no choice in this matter." "But you can't do this," I protested. "It's not fair. It's wrong. It's unethical." "I think you will find I can do this," said Miss Bonnet. "It's in my terms and agreements that if you're late 3 times after 3 warnings, I can ask you to leave. I'm in my right to sack you, and I have." I pulled the chair away from the desk and tore up Miss Bonnet's cheque in disgust, throwing the pieces into her face defiantly, my eyes filling with tears, but my anger rising up inside me like the waves of a tempestuous sea. I could feel that my tongue was wagging like the feisty sails of a large boat blowing rambunctiously in the wind. I blurted out what needed saying, perhaps what others before me may have failed to say, but this contemptuous, narrow-minded woman needed to hear some home truths, which might be a bitter pill for her to have to swallow, but they needed saying nevertheless. "You know what your problem is, Miss Bonnet? You're a sad little old lady who hasn't got anything better to do with her life than make people's lives miserable. I know why you do it. You love the feeling of superiority, don't you? It gives you that feeling that you can belittle people. It makes you feel important. Now, I'm an adult, Miss Bonnet. You treat me like a silly baby. If I say I'm going to be late, it is because I have a legitimate reason for being late. You have fired dozens of girls here for the very same reason you're firing me today. Doesn't it show you that in people's busy lives you can be late? There can be traffic jams, all kinds of credible reasons why people can't get to work on time. You don't know what the word reasonable means, do you, Miss Bonnet? You're a dragon, a bully. Frankly, not a very nice person. Have you not got bigger fish to fry than worry about your staff being late by a few minutes? It's pathetic. It really is pathetic. My being 15 minutes late does not impede my work in any way. Look at the fabulous flower arrangements I've done for you. Irrespective of what you may say about me, you'll be hard-pressed to find anyone with my skills. But there you go, Miss Bonnet. It's your loss. I'm leaving now, but I'll say this about you. You're not the sharpest brick in the box, for an astute businesswoman would know that laying me off would be a huge loss to the business. But not you. No, not you at all. For you, everything is about timekeeping, when what you should be ultimately worrying about is work quality and how proficient your staff are with your clients. Good day, Miss Bonnet. Have a good life, and I hope it's a happy one. At that, I marched out of the shop and dashed to the parking lot, climbing into my truck. I began to drive away. I was so belligerently angry, I could feel the blood boiling in my veins. I wanted to hit something very hard, really hard, to get out my fury, as I'd never been worked up into such a frenzy before. Sometimes I found that driving out into the countryside tended to take the edge off my anger. It helped to soothe my troubled, inflamed soul. In the past, if I became exasperated by a bunch of screaming kids, a drive in the countryside helped, but nothing was working today. I was growing more and more incensed with the audacious impertinence of Miss Bonnet. Why was she such an unreasonable woman? Why could she not judge me on the quality of my work, the way I deal with my customers? My being late by a few minutes had never affected my business whatsoever. It wasn't like I was a flight attendant working for an international flight and had to clock in on the dotted line. This was incredibly different. I knew finding another part-time job 3 times a week, doing something I love like this, was never going to be easy. I drew to the side of the road and texted my husband Ted. "Just been sacked.
I was late for the third time. Tried to reason with Miss Bonnet, but she wouldn't listen. A text returned to me. The woman is unreasonable. Very sorry, love. I'm sure you will find another job very soon. You're a very proficient hard worker. It's her loss and your gain. I tried to text him back, but the screen went blank. Damn, I thought. I'd forgotten to charge my phone. This day was getting progressively worse and worse, second by second, minute by minute. I didn't have a charger with me, so my phone would be out of action for a while. I groaned, finding a part-time job like this again. One that I loved was not going to be easy. This job had been perfect for me, and jobs like this, especially part-time ones, did not grow on trees or dangle on marble fireplaces like Christmas stockings. As I was reflecting over these thoughts, driving in the countryside, admiring the exquisite views from my window, a white SUV came right up behind me and started hooting at me, as if to say, "Hurry up there." For me, that was like the trigger to my hypothetical rifle. I was now blazing with fury. I had just lost my job, and some loser out there on the road had the brazen audacity to honk his horn at me. How dare he? I was going at the right speed limit. He was the one in the wrong, speeding and hooting at me, for ostensibly I was not even breaking the law. He had a bloody cheek, I thought. My feathers were now fully ruffled. If he wanted to fight, I thought furiously, then he's got one. I'll show him that I'm no pushover. I put my foot on the accelerator and passed his truck, giving him the finger and sticking out my tongue at him. It was probably a childish, juvenile and churlish thing to do, but I really didn't care. It had felt strangely good, oddly cathartic, as if I'd let go of some inner angst and turmoil. After all, was I not entitled to let go of some of that steam? Especially after what I'd been through this morning. I was to learn that sticking my tongue out at him, blowing my horn, giving him an FU sign with my finger, was a very bad idea. A very bad idea indeed. Normally I would never behave in such a bold, bellicose, antagonistic way, but I was in a bad, pugnacious mood. My inhibitions had melted away, rather like the butter on a bagel. I had behaved in an inappropriate way that was contrary to my character. I had inadvertently blown caution to the wind. I had absolutely no idea that winding up this threatening stranger was the worst thing I could possibly have done, for I was to find out that this contentious, confrontational character was not the kind of man you rubbed up the wrong way, for he definitely had a chip on his shoulder. As I whizzed past the cantankerous, captious driver in my SUV, I felt momentary victorious, letting out a rather happy whoop. Whoop! Raising my hands up in self-congratulations. I'll show you, I thought, feeling rather proud of myself for being so assertive. But my pride soon dissipated, and that brief moment of satisfaction waned like a groaning wind blowing on a different course, letting out a disagreeable whistle. I could tell by the atrocious way the man was driving behind me that he was as mad as hell and was out for revenge. He began to ram into the back of my SUV 3 repetitive times. Bang, bang, bang. They were forceful bumps. He was honking his horn at me very loudly. Regretfully, there were no other cars on the road, so I felt incredibly isolated, alone, daunted and overwhelmed by this ambiguous predator in tireless pursuit of me. I pushed my foot down on the accelerator to speed up. The man began to speed up. He rammed his truck into the rear side of my SUV over and over again. Looking through my visor window, I could tell that the rear end of my car had taken a huge lashing. The back had buckled up significantly. This man was completely insane. He began honking his horn at me, zigzagging down the road in treacherous, precarious, highly dangerous manoeuvres that showed me that this peevish, truculent person was prepared to use his truck on me as a deadly weapon. I was being pursued by him. He meant business. I knew he was out for the kill, like a lion hot on the trail of a deer. This man was resolutely determined. He would stop at nothing until he'd beaten the very life out of me and left me for dead. How I knew this I don't know, but I certainly did. I felt it in the core of my gut. "Oh my God!" I cried out aloud in my car. "What the heck do I do? What do I do? My cell phone's not working right now." I started to speed up with his truck racing behind me.
I knew that I was seriously in trouble, as this angry man was out to get me. He was sticking his finger up out of the window and making these horrendous signs at me. The monster began chasing me down the mountain roads of West Virginia. In truth, I didn't have a clue where I was. I had lost all sense of direction. And without a working GPS, let's just say I wasn't in a particularly good place. I knew I was definitely lost. Every turn I took was literally a perilous risk. All I needed to do was to get away from this brutish man. But how? That was the question. I began to drive down a sandy road, with him ambushing me from behind, while I kept watching his outrageous, reckless twists and turns in the visor mirror. If I had not known any better, I would say he was driving like an intoxicated drunk, trailing behind me. But what I failed to realize was that the road had reached a dead end, so inadvertently I was rather trapped. There was a small clearing that branched out into a sprawling wood grove that was made up of red maples, sugar maples, red budwoods and oaks. Beyond that there was nothing else, only an ocean of trees, and still more trees, moving their boughs in the soft breeze, under the vast canopy of a very blue sky, without a fluffy cloud in sight. When I'd realized I'd reached this dead end and could not actually turn around my car without the man whizzing up to my rear with his engine accelerating, I quickly put my SUV into park, climbing out of the car, and I began to hightail it into the woods, thanking God for one day in my life when I was actually wearing sneakers, because I had been in a hurry this morning. Most days of the week I tended to wear the most impractical shoes, which would have been a death wish this morning. My heart was pounding violently in my ears as I ran across the clearing that was peppered with tufts of long grass, rocks, occasional wild flowers, and rambunctious weeds that were growing like little cactuses through the earthen floor. I sensed the place was rather remote and off the beaten track, not really the kind of place you would encounter a living soul. I could hear the man's truck grinding to a sudden stop. His tires began to skid on the granular surface of the road, making a discomposing noise. He slammed the truck door behind him. Then I heard shots being fired after me. My heart began to race, thundering through my chest. All I could think is, oh my God, this maniac is going to kill me, and get away with it too. The fear surged through my veins. My legs increased in speed. I deliberately zigzagged towards the woods as the shots were being fired after me. Boom, boom, boom. Believe me, there were a few near misses. "I'll get you, you bloody bitch," came a man's thunderous voice. I was breathing heavily. My mind was in a whirl. My life flashed before my eyes. It would seem that losing my job with Miss Bonnet was pie in the sky now, compared to the pickle I found myself enduring. I knew that the only way I could survive being attacked or killed by this ghastly, morose man was to find a good hiding place, to keep my head together. I couldn't afford to panic under any circumstances. That would be my ruination. As I entered the wood grove, the tall, burly, wide, substantial trees penciled up into the sky like spectacular, imposing, verdant giants, their boughs generously covered in a plethora of leaves. The forest sparkled with a dewy, viridescent green. The sunlight danced through the branches, dappling everything in a soft, ethereal light. Even as I ran, I could smell the rich earthen floor, the bouquet of wild flowers on the wind. I could feel the beauty of this place as curvaceous tree trunks, rocks, broken forest debris were swathed resplendently in rich, sumptuous carpets of luxurious green moss. Then there were ferns with lacy, bountiful leaves spread out like open umbrellas. The ground cover on the forest floor was bountifully prolific, but where to hide, that was the vexing conundrum. I decided to conceal myself behind a large tree trunk rather than leave myself vulnerable to being caught in a compromising position where I could be ambushed and unable to escape. I stood very still, hardly daring to breathe, as the man finally entered the woodgrove. I could hear him as he thundered forwards, stomping on his feet like a belligerent bull, relentlessly pursuing a matador's red flag. No prizes for guessing who was that red flag. I was beginning to breathe very heavily. My heart could not stop pounding. It was loud in my ears. I was terrified that this man would find me simply by hearing my fear, for it had a frequency, I was sure of that could definitely be discerned. I took a quick peek at him from the corner of my tree. My God, he was possibly the most intimidating man that I'd ever seen. He was built like a machine, as if he spent his lifetime working out in a gym, pounding weights. He was strong, cold-blooded, mean-looking. I suspected he was such an angry character that punching a boxing bag at the gym and lifting some insanely heavy weights was his way of letting off steam. But today I was about to be his punching bag. He was wearing a string vest, so his sizable muscles were fully on display. He was heavily inked. His bald head was covered with a red bandana, but his face was contorted in the ugliest, most rageful expression. I could swear that there was foam emanating from his mouth like a rabid dog. "I know you're here, young lady. You're not going to get away with what you've done. Nobody treats me with such contempt. No one who does that escapes my wrath. Do you hear that, young lady? No one escapes my wrath. I saw you giving me the finger, sticking out your tongue at me, back there on the road. You are not getting away with this today. You are going to beg me for your life. I'm not in an agreeable mood, so you'll have to do a whole lot of begging." He laughed out loud, as if he was applauding himself by his pernicious humour. He smirked, and then unloaded a couple more bullets, firing them up into the air. Oh my God, I thought. He had something that ominously looked like a machine gun in his hands, like the rifles that they use in war movies, although I know nothing about ammunition. I knew this man could potentially kill me. I would be one of those dead bodies uncovered in the woods, whose murderer was never found. A duplicitous case of road rage gone horribly wrong. A large man who fancied himself as the Terminator was now in pursuit of me, listening attentively to every sound. One moment he walked past me and was so close I could literally reach out and touch him, but thank God he never saw me. I could smell the stench of his sweat. It infused the air with a pungent, obnoxious odour. Until now the forest had been pleasantly peaceful, filled with a pretty chorus of birdsong. But then the birdsong simply dissipated, as if someone had switched off the music centre in your living room. It became ominously quiet. Indeed, things were so quiet that my pounding heart seemed louder than the silence. I was petrified that this man would hear my breathing, for my internal rhythms, such as my breathing and heartbeat, appeared louder than this silence. The man was walking around the place searching for me. For some reason he'd sensed I hadn't gone deeper into the woods. How he discerned this I couldn't fathom. Then he saw me. He let out a huge, manic, rapturous roar, like an untamed predatory wild animal, a sound which travelled far and wide through the wood-grove with a powerful echo that could not be dismissed. I began to scream, "Get away from me! Don't come near me! Get away! Get away!" "Oh, what will you do to me?" he said, looking at me through his narrowing, guileful eyes that looked terribly pleased with himself. "You'll stick out your tongue at me? Give me the finger, will you? I don't think so. Look at you. You're pathetic. Not so cocky now, are you, girl? Go away. Leave me alone. Go away. You're crazy. There's something seriously wrong with you. You're sick in the head." In that moment I thought this vindictive man was going to shoot me. But no, this man had other ideas. Shooting me was far too easy. He wanted to inflict pain on me first. He wanted me to suffer, to get exactly what I deserved. I could see his intentions in his eyes. A murderous, revengeful look that wants to inflict massive suffering. I tried to run. I really did. But I was no match for this man. I was slight, small, petite. He was big and strong. As I ran, I felt his huge hand grabbing me from behind. He toppled me over onto the ground, so I fell backwards onto the earthen floor. He crawled above me, his calloused, roughed hands clasped around my neck. His furious, enraged face flushed bright pink. He began to squeeze my neck tightly. "How does this feel, you bitch?" he said, staring into my eyes with a measure of satisfied pleasure. I was fighting back with all my might, twisting and contorting my body, but this man held me down with a mighty, powerful force, upon which I was rendered helpless. Then redemption came my way. I heard this booming sound. It sounded like something ponderous, big and mighty was thundering in the forest. Then there he was, proud, tall, lofty, majestic, inquisitive. This titanic-sized creature stood still, watching the man intently, who had his hands clasped around my neck. But the man, upon beholding the creature, suddenly released his tight hold from me, consumed by astonishment. I don't believe for a moment he could comprehend what he was seeing, but he certainly discerned that this creature staring at him through his deep-set dark eyes was a potential threat. I choked and spluttered as he released his grip from me, finally being able to draw in fresh air. It was such a relief to be able to breathe again. I hastily sat up also to see the creature. I knew at once it was a Bigfoot. It was clear to see by the discernment in his wise eyes that he had a pretty good idea what was going on. There is no doubt in my mind that he was quick-witted, sharp, intuitive, highly perceptive, and terribly kind. He had the loveliest eyes I've ever seen. I knew this creature would help me, save me even. I was absolutely certain of it. I cried out to the Bigfoot, who had a human-like face. "You see this man over here? He's trying to kill me. Please help me. Please help me." For a second, the Bigfoot's deep-set dark eyes were pinned on me. He seemed to listen to my words, as though meditating on what I was saying. As weird as it may sound, he comprehended my pleas. I know he did. The man got to his feet and began babbling. "This woman, she's trouble." He reached for his rifle, which was clear his intention was to use on the Bigfoot. But it was too late, for the Bigfoot had read his thoughts before he could even act them out with his rifle. The Bigfoot bounded forward with his feet now standing on the man's rifle, so he was unable to retrieve it. His dark eyes were staring down at the man, whose eyes had grown round with terror. The Bigfoot's lips rolled back to reveal large human-like teeth. He began to growl at the man. It was a deep, low, guttural growl. It was a terrifying sound, and with his gnashes showing, let's just say he looked ferocious. The petrified man tried to get up on his feet and ran backwards, but the Bigfoot pushed him backwards so that he fell over, and the Bigfoot held him down with one arm. He went stumbling onto the ground. The man whom previously had impressed me by his size was now dwarfed and intimidated by this gargantuan creature, who made him look inconspicuous, tiny, and honestly quite pathetic. I remember even thinking that next to the Bigfoot he looked so fragile, as if he would easily break, like a fine piece of bone china. The man was screaming, even calling out to me for help, but I was not going to stick my neck out for him, for this man was duplicitous and untrustworthy. "Shoot him! Shoot him, you bitch! Shoot him! The rifle's over there on the ground! Get it! Shoot him! The bloody Bigfoot is going to kill me, can't you see? Like you were going to kill me a moment before. I'm sorry, but I have no sympathy for your plight. You deserve everything you get. I'm sorry." The next thing I knew was that the Bigfoot reached for the rifle. He began to beat the man's head with it. He screamed, "No! No! No!" his oscillating arms fiercely fighting back. But he was no match for the Bigfoot. The man became silent, his body limp and lifeless. His glazed eyes seemed to stare vacantly into space. Truly, I felt no empathy for this man. What the Bigfoot did next was exceedingly bizarre. He pulled out the man's tongue, out from his mouth. Then he sat down on the earthen ground and began to eat it, as if it was a delicacy. Then he even tore off a piece for me, as if to say, "Would you like some?" He did offer it to me. I was shocked and shook my head vigorously, unable to stop staring at the creature as he ate the human tongue. It seemed quite chewy. I knew I was in no danger. The creature had saved my life, and as he ate the tongue he chattered away garrulously to me in a language that I did not comprehend, as if I was his very good friend, all the while looking at me through animated brown eyes that made me naturally like him. I stared at him in complete, total and utter awe. "Why?" I asked him. "Why are you eating a man's tongue?" I heard the words in my mind. "He used his tongue for evil. I'm using it for good. It tastes very good. Tongues are delicious. I'm not going to let a good thing go to waste." Did I really hear him say that, I wondered. "I better go," I told him, getting up onto my feet. The Bigfoot smacked his lips together. He got up. I heard him say in my head, "I'll see you safely out of the woods." I looked up at him for a moment. He looked down at me. I realised he was easily over 8 foot tall, possibly between 600 and 700 pounds, covered in long flowing hair on his body, a tortoiseshell colour with mixed varied shades, rather like those unusual cats you get. I walked through the woods with the Bigfoot by my side, climbing into my truck, being able to manoeuvre around the dead man's vehicle. The Bigfoot all the while watched me as I drove. I quickly raised my hand towards him to wave at him. He did the same with me, nodding his head. I returned the compliment. Then I drove away. I never told anyone about the dead body in the woods, or what had happened to me. It was my secret after all, that I never intended to share with a single soul. I'm sure I'm not alone in harbouring a secret like this. I never found out who the man was that died, but trust me, the world is a better place without him. He was evil to his core, and if I'd saved his life, he would have turned around and killed me. I know that to be a fact. Needless to say, after my harrowing experience in the wood, I didn't care about losing my job at the florist. Somehow it seemed inconsequential in the great scheme of things. A week after I'd left the florist, I got a visit from Miss Bonnet. When I opened the door of my home to see her standing there, I had half a mind to slam it back in her face. But she pushed the door open with her hands, asking me if she might have a chat with me for a moment. Fine, I said, shrugging my shoulders, leading the woman into the kitchen, while boiling her a hot cup of tea. I knew Miss Bonnet drank tea only. "I've come here to apologise," she said. "You were absolutely right. I was exceedingly unreasonable. I guess I've been unreasonable all my life. Maybe, like you say, I am a sad old woman. But I do hope I'm not a dragon or a bully. You see, growing up as a young girl, my father was punctilious. He believed being late was the height of rudeness, was grossly unacceptable. I think it was ingrained in my psyche that lateness of any kind was not acceptable. But times have changed significantly. Life's got a lot busier these days. People's lives are wrought with issues. But living on my own, I failed to realise this. You, my dear, made me take a long, hard look at myself. I hate to admit it to you. I didn't like what I was seeing. What I've clearly become." Miss Bonnet had tears in her eyes. I reached out to comfort her. "I'm sorry," I said. "I was gutted when you sacked me. I didn't mean to lash out at you in the way I did. I deserved it, my dear. I really did. Needless to say, all my customers are exceedingly outraged that I've sacked you. I can't say I blame them. They're saying that they will not be ordering any flowers from me unless I reinstate you immediately. You see, my dear, my customers adore you. You were right. You've got heaps of talent, so losing you is very bad for business. I can see that now." "What are you saying, Mrs. Bonnet?" "I'm saying, if you'll accept your job back, I would be delighted if you would return. But what about if I'm late, Miss Bonnet? Because I will be late again, possibly many more times. I can't go through all that aggro again." "I don't care if you're late, my dear. I care about the quality of your work. That's the only thing that's important. I'm glad to tell you that I've worked for Miss Bonnet for many years, and then she handed over her florist to me when she retired. Never once did she ever accuse me of being late again. So maybe a leopard can change their spots. As for the Bigfoot, I do think of him often. I've thought of him a lot over the years. I'm ever grateful that he saved my life and that he listened to my pleas. I'm certain that obnoxious man would almost certainly have killed me. So there you are. That's my story."
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.